Chapter 605. The Baymang young man who failed to gain any advantage was furious. He couldn't care less about his demeanor and wanted to fight in close quarters to chop this nameless soldier into pieces. He was a warrior trained by a top master after all. He paid the painful price of a spear piercing through his shoulder in exchange for a chance to get close. When he was 10 steps away, the Mang Dao's aura surged, not giving him a chance to throw the spear. The scout was startled and then smiled. He pretended to be surprised. Then he smiled sinisterly, as if he had succeeded in his scheme. The young man who wasn't stupid knew that something was wrong, but he didn't want to believe that a crossbowman who only knew some small tricks could be so powerful. He still insisted on getting close and attacking quickly. Lu Do didn't pick up the short spear in his bag anymore. He used one hand to block the sharp Baymang saber that could pierce through armor. The young man from the royal court was delighted and suddenly chopped down with all his strength. It didn't move at all. Lu Do twisted his wrist and broke the carefully crafted Baymang saber. Then he punched the opponent's abdomen and smashed his intestines. The Baymang young man who was supposed to have a meteoric rise under the protection of his family lost all his fighting power on the spot. Lu Do spread out his hands and grabbed the enemy's arms. Then, he tore the unknown young general into two halves. Blood sprayed all over Zhong Tongzi. Lu Do kicked the corpse away. He didn't wave his hand to wipe away the blood, nor did he pay attention to the newly dead man. He turned back and continued to enter the battlefield. In this bloody battle, the Biao leader and the deputy Biao leader died together. None of the 200 Baymang cavalry escaped. They didn't have time to send a message. Sergeant Li Hanlin became the temporary leader. Lu Do silently picked up all the short spears and buried the Biao leader with Li Shiyue. He then stood behind Li Hanlin. Li Hanlin said calmly, "The wounded have returned to the south. The other 36 people and I will pick the horses and continue to the north. If I die, Lu Do will lead you to the north." This kind of scout war, where one side was destined to be completely wiped out, happened one after another on the front lines. 3 days later, in Baymang's #1 strategic town in the south, the 18,000 kilowatt army, led by Hong Gu-en, a young and strong man who seemed to be on par with Dong Zhuo this year, marched out of the city and engaged in a large-scale cavalry battle against the Longxiang army at the vast green tile basin. Hong Gu-en was just over 40 years old. He was elegant and had a scholarly air, but he was extremely ruthless and decisive in commanding his troops. He was unwilling to defend the city and wait for reinforcements. He vowed to annihilate the invading enemy in one fell swoop. It was only when the troops were about 30 li away from the tile building did Hong Gu and find out that it was the 10,000-man Longxiang army. However, after this Confucian general finished strategizing, he told the valiant generals under his command to wait respectfully for good news. He then sat on top of the city wall and set up a chessboard, chatting and laughing with a national chess player. The Hua Zhu army was twice the size of the Longxiang army. How could he not win? Hong Gu-en was certain that once they won on the chessboard, they would also win outside the city. It would definitely become a story that would last for all eternity. The green tile basin was extremely advantageous for cavalry to charge. The momentum of both sides was vast. Most of the people who fled north during the spring and autumn period already had children of their own. The old people were all deeply moved by the strength of Baymang's national strength and military strength. They gradually forgot about the sound of the Bailiang cavalry's hooves. Moreover, these new people had never heard of the sound of hooves in recent years. The Bailiang cavalry had once trampled all over the spring and autumn period. However, wasn't that an old debt? When the people in the tile-building city first heard about the battle, they were slightly panicked. However, their fear did not last long. They began to laugh at the Bailiang for daring to come to the tile-building city with a pitiful 10,000-man army. The two armies were like two torrents clashing against each other. The Hua Zhu army's howls shook the heavens. It seemed that their momentum had far surpassed the Bailiang cavalry, who were still silent during the charge. When they were 500 paces away, the Bailiang army shouted one word at the same time. "Kill!" On top of the city wall, Hong Gu-en's eyelids twitched. The chessboard in front of him trembled more and more violently. In the end, the chess pieces were already jumping. A barefooted youth in black ran at the front with a black tiger. They left the elite cavalry of northern Liang far behind them, who were running as fast as thunder. The withered youth tied his hair into a braid. He grabbed the huge black tiger and smashed it at the enemy. Then, he bent his knees and jumped into the sky, falling into the enemy ranks. It was extremely shocking. Did this idiot want to be the enemy of 10,000 people? After the black tiger fell, it instantly killed more than 30 cavalry. The black-clothed youth, who did not wear any weapons or armor, only ran in a straight line. Those who collided with him were all partially dead. The Hua Zhu army had cultivated a cavalry that specialized in killing enemy generals and brave men. There were about 300 of them. They were all dressed in ordinary armor, but they were tall and sturdy, strong and agile. They came from famous Jianghu families and were extremely good at fighting. However, even if they were divided into 10 groups and the 300 men were urgently transferred to one place to block or chase the black-clothed youth, they still let him pass through most of the Hua Zhu army. After the two armies mixed, the pressure on the youth was greatly reduced. He was like a fish in water, rushing straight to the city gate on the northern highlands of the Green Tile Basin. A man and a tiger ran to the city gate. The youth stepped on the back of the black tiger and jumped to the top of the city gate. After asking the dumbfounded Hong Gu a question, he pulled the latter's head out of his body. This was the Battle of the Green Tile Basin. When the second son of Ren Tu, Su Longxiang, stepped onto the stage for the first time, he slaughtered the Liang dynasty into an empty city. The Bailiang cavalry's hooves were like thunder. 10,000 Longxiang army. 10,000 thunder. Half of the 18,000 Hua Zhu army, known as the Iron Army of Bei Mang, died in battle. The surrendered soldiers were killed. The entire army was killed. Bei Mang heard the thunder. Chapter 606. Two 10,000-word chapters completed. The Southern Dynasty had its own imperial court, but its rank was lower than that of the Northern Royal Court. When the older generation first entered Bei Mang's territory, some of the more experienced aristocratic families of the Central Plains had seen the scene of disagreements and fights breaking out at every turn. At that time, they were shocked. They couldn't imagine that such an uncouth imperial court could challenge the Liang dynasty, which had already unified the spring and autumn period. Later, the empress showed mercy, and the Southern Dynasty was established. This imperial court was obviously much more cultured and elegant. There were endless disputes in the main hall, and there were bound to be some red faces and ears. However, for more than 10 years, there had never been a quarrel like today, to the point where it was about to turn into a fight. All of this was due to the new smoke rising from the southern border. The 10,000 Dragon Elephant cavalry first slaughtered the strategic border town of Tile Building. If they had stopped after winning the first battle, it would have been fine. Then, under the leadership of the second son of the king of Bailiang, they made a detour and raided the next strategic town, Gentleman's Pavilion. The 6,000 Longxiang army unexpectedly defeated 8,000 soldiers and horses. The two major defeats of the Southern Dynasty were already an indisputable fact. The situation was not only hot, but also painful. Except for Zhong Shentong, who didn't dare to return, the other generals who held authority all kept silent. Occasionally, they would exchange glances in the hall, then slightly shook their heads and sighed. On the contrary, the civil officials of the Jia surname Gao Hua were quarreling. Among them, there was a fatty wearing a purple robe who scolded the most fiercely. He almost pulled out the 18 generations of Hong Gu An's ancestors, who had died for the country. Not only did he scold the civil officials who were giving orders, but he also insinuated that a few old generals were also included in the scolding. The fatty's saliva flew everywhere. This bastard surnamed Hong is fishing for fame. Even if I survive, I will stab him to death with a knife. The tiled city overlooks the green tiled basin. The cavalry has an innate advantage in the charge. You look down on the Dragon Elephant army, leaving the city to fight, but you actually have the guts to let the idiot lead the troops to the bottom of the slope. What? Do you wholeheartedly want to start a completely fair fight with the Northern Liang cavalry? Didn't Hong Guan claim to be well-read in military books? What did he read so much that he defecated? I don't remember which old general's favorite student Hong Guan was. Who dares to remind me? Everyone in the hall quietly looked at an old general who was resting with his eyes closed. The general had white hair but a youthful complexion. He was very good at keeping his composure, and didn't seem to have any intention of being calculative with Fatty Dong. Fatty Dong's cheeks trembled, and he pointed to a third-rank official in charge of the Southern Dynasty's Ministry of Revenue. Using Tile Building Army and Gentleman's Pavilion Army, we only managed to defeat half of the Northern Liang's Dragon Elephant Army. You Mother**Ker actually told me to have the border armies of Li Gu and Mao Long take the initiative to pursue them. What? These 14,000 troops aren't human. They're all your Yuanzhen family's maids. You think you can kill them as you wish? Old man, you sure have the boldness of not being afraid of squandering money when you have a big family. You are just playing with His Majesty's generosity. That aged civil official was so angry that his face turned ashen. His righteousness was awe-inspiring as he confronted that fatty. However, his voice was trembling as he said, "My northern Mang nation's prestige cannot be disgraced. Our southern dynasty's generals and soldiers are not to be insulted." Fatty Dong's words were extremely harsh. He glared and said, "Dead old thief, guard your Ministry of Revenue well and make money. If you overstep the rules and talk about military affairs, I'll beat you with a club and put you in the coffin. Don't think that I won't take care of you just because your pockmarked granddaughter threw flirtatious glances at me." The old man was humiliated and fainted on the spot. He had no choice but to be carried out. A young official who had jumped through the Dragon's Gate because of the imperial examination couldn't stand it anymore. He said softly, "That King of Baelyong's second son is deranged. Killing 9,000 people wasn't enough. Afterwards, he still wants to massacre the city. He's clearly a madman. If the Baelyong cavalry insists on going their own way, ignoring the two towns of Fengli and Gumaolong and going north, they'll soon reach us. Do we really want the generals to disregard the defensive line and move the troops here? If by any chance it was a diversion to the east and attack to the west, using a lone army to tie down too much of our dynasty's military power, Su Shao would personally lead the elite troops to the northeast. Together with Gu Jiantang advancing on the eastern front, it would be difficult to deal with. We can't be led by the nose by Baelyong. I've heard that General Dong never cares about small gains and losses when leading troops. It seems that today is different." This newly appointed official, who was ranked second in the imperial examinations and favored by the Empress, had a dignified appearance. His voice wasn't loud, but the old Minister of Revenue had fainted from anger. It was so quiet that a pin drop could be heard in the main hall. Furthermore, his words weren't without aim, so he seemed to be full of energy. Fatty Dong sneered and said, "Pedantic scholar, you're just an armchair strategist. Wait until you've killed people and seen blood before you come back to reason with your Grandpa Dong." The young official responded with a sneer. He didn't want to pester this extremely lucky fatty. He didn't overdo it and just wanted to express his stance. In the future, if what he said was true and the Empress came to settle accounts, it would be equivalent to trampling on Fatty Dong. Unknowingly, it would raise his own prestige by a large margin. However, before that day came, an old general's words made him feel ashamed. It was Great General Huang Songpu, who was the first person to seize military power as a remnant of the spring and autumn period. Although the southern dynasty was showing signs of rising up from behind, Lu Gui, who was praised by the Empress as half of Su Shao, and Yang Yuanzhan, who was a commoner and had defected to the army, were beginning to overshadow Huang Songpu in terms of prestige. However, seniority wasn't important. Yang Yuanzhan himself was once half of Huang Songpu's vanguard. Furthermore, only old General Song was willing to discipline Dong Zhuo, the devil incarnate. As a result, Huang Songpu's words carried the most weight in the southern dynasty. Hong Gu-en, who had caused this disaster, was under Great General Huang Songpu. It was difficult for him to escape being scolded by Fatty Dong in the imperial court. Chapter 607. Unexpectedly, this time the old general stood on the same side as Dong Zhuo. Military books are dead, but the person leading the troops is alive. When facing off on the battlefield, one must first consider the temperament of the opponent. First, this time the Longxiang army will attack our border first. They will not take any prisoners, and it is inevitable that they will massacre the entire city. The strategy of conciliation is a joke to both Liang Mang and Liang Mang. Second, as Dong Zhuo said, the Longxiang army's original intention was to take a detour and take over Tile-Building Gentleman's Pavilion, Ligu, Maolong, and the other 4 towns. As for how many people will survive after the battle, I think Su Shao does not care at all. That young man with astonishing martial strength will not care even less. Using a lone army and a single battle, they do not expect to defeat half of the Southern Dynasty's military strength, but they want to destroy the morale and popular sentiment that the Southern Dynasty spent more than 10 years to accumulate. This is where Baelyong's evil intentions lie. When the next battle begins, the Baelyong army will be wiped out and trampled under horse hooves. With the example of the past, who dares not to surrender? Third, I guess that after the Longxiang army goes north in one spurt of energy, There will definitely be a follow-up force, perhaps around 50,000 men. Whether or not they will attack is uncertain. We can choose whether to fight or not. If the Longxiang army swallows Li Gu and Mao Long, then we will really have to fight. If they can't, then we can catch our breath. As for what Assistant Minister Liu is worried about, the Beiliang army wants to tilt our border forces to the west and tear open a hole for the army to advance from the northeast. Of course, it is not impossible. However, Assistant Minister Liu may not know that in order to prevent the Beiliang army from merging with Gu Jiantong's eastern front, the central front has been a large pocket. Even if the Beiliang army allows them to advance 800 li in one go and fill it with 160,000 men, they may not be able to fill it afterwards. If it really comes to that point, it will not be us or even the king of Beiliang and Gu Jiantang who have the final say. Only our emperor and the Zhao family's son can make the final decision. It's not convenient for me to say too much about the central front. I hope that Assistant Minister Liu can forgive me. The young official was in fear and trepidation. He was also proud that Huang Songpu, the king of the southern courtyard, had personally explained his doubts. He cupped his hands and said in a deep voice, "Lu Shu's knowledge is shallow." As the king of the southern courtyard, Huang Songpu was nominally in charge of 400,000 soldiers in the southern dynasty. However, the empress had always supported the Beimang generals and preceptors. They each had their own system and restricted each other. Moreover, Huang Songpu had gradually retreated behind the scenes in recent years. The so-called title of the king of the southern courtyard would sooner or later belong to someone else. If it were not for the urgency of this war and the need to intervene, he would have already faded out of the southern dynasty. Huang Songpu had never been on good terms with the two generals, Lu Guo and Yang Yuanzhan. He also did not have a good impression of Dong Zhuo. It was only when the situation was truly chaotic that Huang Songpu felt that he was unable to make ends meet. This was especially so after the death of the only one he could rely on, Hong Guan, which made the old general even more disheartened. A clan leader of the Jia sect frowned and said, "Since that lone army wants to attack Li Gu Maolong regardless of the consequences, are we just going to let the remaining 4,000 Beiliang cavalry run amok in the territory?" Everyone knew that Lu Guo had a good relationship with the fat man. However, seeing the fat man's eyes darting around, the tall and mighty old general could not help but feel angry. He approached the fat man and gave him a hard kick. "You scoundrel who doesn't wake up early if there are no benefits. You've already spilled a few catties of saliva. Aren't you just trying to solve this mess? Even the great king of the South Courtyard has spoken up for you. Why didn't you take advantage of the situation this time?" Dong Zhuo had a troubled expression. The 4,000 Longxiang army is still manageable. However, that person, 2-second son, is really troublesome. If the two sides face each other and he comes to take the head of a general from an army of 10,000 and kills me, my two beautiful daughters-in-law will become widows. Won't they cry themselves to death? Lu Guo raised his leg and was about to kick again when the fat man hurriedly jumped away. The old general laughed and scolded, "Your family's daughters-in-law are the daughter of the mountain master of Bing Ti Mountain. Do you think you don't have powerful thugs by your side? If you don't dare to go to Bing Ti Mountain and call for help. It's best if you bring that person with you to Li Gu. I'll allow you to bring 8,000 men to Li Gu. No more than that. If His Majesty holds you accountable, this old man will take responsibility for you. If you dare to bring even one more soldier, just pretend this old man didn't say anything." Dong Zhuo said half-believingly, "Really? Don't turn your back on me after this. Right now, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court can hear you." As soon as he finished speaking, Dong Zhuo rolled his eyes and muttered, "F***ck, it seems that when the time comes, no one will be willing to stand up and prove my innocence." The pillars of the southern dynasty all smiled knowingly. This Dong Zhuo was sinister, but he never lacked self-awareness. Lu Guo said angrily, "This old man's fart is more useful than your oath." Dong Zhuo rubbed his hands and laughed. "If that's the case, then I'll go to Maolong and throw away my life. This kind of strenuous and unrewarding dirty work, I'll do it." As soon as he finished speaking, Dong Zhuo trotted away as if there was oil on the soles of his feet. Lu Guo and Yang Yuanzhan, who had a good personal relationship, also left one after another. Huang Songpu still had to stay in the imperial court. Lu Guo waited outside the hall until Yang Yuanzhan came down the stone steps. The latter was known for being a man of few words. He calmly asked, "Dong Zhuo is going to Maolong and not Li Gu?" Lu Guo laughed and said, It's obvious that the Longxiang army will slaughter Li Gu. This bastard is lazy to the bone. If he can sit, he won't stand. If he can lie down, he won't sit. Yang Yuanzhan smiled old-fashioned. Lu Gui suddenly asked, "What do you think of that person who slaughters the second son?" Yang Yuanzhan said indifferently, "On the battlefield, there is no immortal enemy." Dong Zhuo ran out like a wisp of smoke and did not forget to look back at the hall. He dug his ears and sighed. "It's so King noisy. Alas, when can I be the only voice here?" Tao De Sect was built at the beginning of the Yellow River. It was rumored that there was a hovering mountain behind Heaven's Gate. The imperial preceptor, who had transcended mortality and entered the divine realm, cultivated immortality there and did not care about worldly affairs for 30 years. Qilin Immortal had 6 outstanding disciples. Other than the 2 immortals who were guarding Heaven's Gate and the foot of the mountain, the rest were scattered all over Beimang. However, when an old monk sat outside the fog of Heaven's Gate of Tao De Sect, the 4 immortals who were preaching outside returned to Tao De Sect except for the one in the palace. The kind-looking old monk did not say anything and sat down outside Heaven's Gate. Heaven's Gate was a natural hole formed by 2 towering peaks facing each other. Clouds and fog lingered inside. Outside the gate, there were 999 jade steps. Even if one walked up the steps and looked at the gate from a close distance, one would not be able to see the mystery inside. Outside Heaven's Gate, there were 18 Taoist temples, 9 on each side. There was an endless stream of pilgrims. The endless stream of incense blended into the fog all year round, making Tao De Sect seem more like a paradise on earth. One of the main paths led to Heaven's Gate. The old monk was on the flat ground in front of the first step, meditating peacefully. First, the purple-robed immortal came out of Heaven's Gate and flew down the mountain on his sword. The sword whirled and the dragon roared for 3 days. However, they were not allowed to come within 3 feet of the old monk. Then, the immortal who held the jade rui flew from the foot of hovering mountain to Heaven's Gate. The purple-robed immortal rode his sword and walked down step by step. After walking for 3 days and 3 nights, he had reached the 300th step. Then, 3 immortal-looking immortals arrived. 2 of them were either standing or sitting cross-legged at the peak of the Taoist temple at the foot of the mountain. The last direct disciple of the imperial advisor made a hand gesture and walked toward the old monk. Every step he took was extremely slow, but every time he touched the ground, the heaven and earth would shake. After half a day, the old monk began to recite the sutra. He recited the Diamond Sutra word by word. After reciting the Diamond Sutra once, the old monk, who admitted that he did not know many words and spells, began to recite. More and more people gathered at the foot of the mountain. There were no less than 10,000 people. Almost 10 days had passed since the old monk sat down. The flying sword had cut the clean and white kasaya thousands of times. The Taoist immortal who struck the heavenly thunder with his small steps also walked to a few feet behind the old monk. The old monk's whole body was golden, covered in blood. The old monk put his palms together and finished reciting all the Dharma he knew. He said softly, "Amitabha." Many pilgrims could guess what would happen at that moment. They all turned their heads away, unable to stand on their tiptoes to watch. A white rainbow streaked across the sky, higher than Heaven's Gate. Behind it was a yellow waterfall. "I did not enter Heaven's Gate, but I am higher than the heavens." The white rainbow stopped and revealed itself. The white-robed monk said loudly, "This poor monk is here to return the favor." It was impolite not to return the favor. The yellow river hung in the sky. This white-robed monk pulled the entire yellow river over. Chapter 608. The monk in white carried a large section of the yellow river over the heavenly gate and flooded the Tao Te sect. The pilgrims inside and outside the 18 temples were stunned. When they saw the yellow river hanging in the sky, they were afraid that the monk would lose his mind and pour the water over their heads. If that happened, they would die unjustly. They would really be like fish in the moat. The monk in white went straight to the hovering mountain. There was a lot of discussion at the foot of the mountain. Many pilgrims were satisfied after they came back to their senses. This strange phenomenon was really worthy of being called the work of immortals. How many times could it be seen in the human world? In addition to the pilgrims who came to the 18 temples of Tao Te sect to burn incense, there were also a lot of people who wanted to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. The buildings on the top of the Taoist temple had already been divided up by the rich and powerful of Beimang. A man in plain clothes stood in the turbulent crowd. He was inconspicuous as he rarely raised his head and looked directly at others. He did not look very elegant at all except for his height. He came to the foot of the mountain half a year ago. His food, clothing, housing and transportation were ordinary. He also ate scallion pancakes with many pilgrims to fill his stomach. At night, he would just find an empty space to lie down and sleep. At most, he would use a long gown as a quilt. When he saw the monk in white leaping over the heavenly gate as if he was going to trouble immortal Qilin, he did not want to stay any longer. When he was about to turn around, he smiled warmly and stopped. A short and sturdy man with dark skin came to his side. His arms were as long as an ape's and his earlobes were unusually thick, similar to the ears of the Bodhisattva statue. When ordinary people saw him, they would only say that he was blessed with good fortune. The middle-aged man's eyes were indifferent. He pursed his lips and stood side by side with a relatively young man in plain clothes. Comparisons were odious. The latter, who was originally not outstanding, immediately became gentle and elegant. He smiled and said, "I knew you would come, but I didn't expect to see you again." The dark-skinned man grunted in agreement. The man in long clothes raised his hand and put it in front of his eyes. He looked into the distance. The two immortals of Tao Te's sect stayed behind to guard the old monk in two Zen temples. The three immortals entered the heavenly gate one after another to stop the monk in white. He said with emotion, "The five immortals could not break the golden body of the dragon tree monk." The middle-aged man said calmly, "The sages of the three sects are different from us. When they reach the peak of their respective states, there is no need to be envious of them." The tall man in his 30s chuckled. "I thought you were going to tear that yellow river apart." The man shook his head and said, "5 spiritual masters ganged up on the dragon tree eminent monk. As a disciple, Li Xiaoxin returned the courtesy to the Tao Te sect. Even if he set up a bigger scene, it wouldn't be too much." From the looks of it, the two Zen temples were in the right, while the Tao Te sect was being unreasonable. "I'm just here to watch the show." The man in his 30s retracted his gaze. He actually had a pair of pupil-less, silver-white eyes. He rejoiced in their misfortune and said, "With this downpour, the Tao Te Tao sect has become a pond. Our northern Mang Daoist sect has lost all of its face. If the imperial preceptor doesn't make a move, how will he have the face to exterminate the Buddha?" The man didn't have the leisure to laugh at others like the man beside him. His words were as plain as ever, never deliberately giving others the feeling of thunder on the ground. "Then I don't know." The Dragon Tree Holy Monk explained the Diamond Sutra in simple terms. "It's a pity that you didn't hear it." The man frowned and said, "Hong Jingyan, the Dragon Tree Eminent Monk studied the Diamond Sutra his whole life and achieved the Buddha Golden Body. Yet you want to grasp everything in your hands. It won't be beneficial to your martial arts attainments in the future. Instead, it will be harmful." The silver-eyed man called Hong Jingyan laughed self-deprecatingly. "Anyway, I can't beat you no matter how much I practice martial arts. It's better to learn some fancy skills that can scare people. Look at Li Chungang from the Liang dynasty who borrowed his sword and Li Xiaoxin who hung on the river. It'll be talked about in Jianghu for 40 to 50 years. The man didn't seem to understand the ways of the world. He said, "How to persuade is my business. How to do it is your business." Hong Jingyan couldn't help but laugh. If you really want someone to do something, who dares to not do it? The honest man dismissed it with a smile. Hong Jingyan, who was knocked down from the 4th place in the world by the white-robed Luo Yang, suggested, "Let's eat something?" The man nodded and said, "We left in a hurry and didn't bring any money. I'll pay you back later." Hong Jingyan moved his feet and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "You're actually arguing with me about this?" He didn't expect the man to say bluntly, "Our friendship isn't at that level." Hong Jingyan laughed heartily and didn't insist on his opinion. There was a Taoist temple nearby that had vegetarian dishes, but it was overcrowded. The two waited patiently. During this time, the man was bumped by a careless pilgrim and didn't move at all. However, the burly pilgrim stumbled and he reached out to support him. The pilgrim came to the Tao Te sect to burn incense and ask for money. He wasn't a good person who sincerely believed in Taoism. After being humiliated, he was about to get angry. However, when he saw a man whose physique was not inferior to his, he cursed and left. The middle-aged man turned a deaf ear to him. Hong Jingyan was familiar with his temperament and was used to it. The two waited for a table and Hong Jingyan ordered 2 bowls of noodles. They sat opposite each other and buried their heads in the noodles. Hong Jingyan sucked the noodles into his mouth and asked vaguely, step by step, the 3 realms of Diamond Finger and Celestial Phenomenon, what's the difference between them and the 2 Zen temples Invincible Vajra, Immortal Qilin's Shen Finger and Chao Chongqing Celestial Phenomenon? Moreover, the realm of martial arts is like Dong Tai's Shen Finger. It's not quite the same as ours. The man finished his noodles and put down his chopsticks on the bowl. He shook his head and said, I'm not good at reasoning. If you're willing, we can fight. Fight with you? Hong Jingyan didn't respond at all. He answered his own question and said calmly, I can carry the Yellow River to cross the Heaven's Gate. Of course, it'll be more difficult. But Li Dang has to follow the rules. He won't pour the Yellow River over everyone's head. He's unwilling and he doesn't dare. If it's me, I'll do whatever I want. Taoists pay attention to the presence of deities. If a monk wants to become a Buddha, he must first have Buddha in his heart. In the end, the people of the 3 sects all borrowed power. Since they borrowed something from the heavens, it's like a commoner borrowing money. They'll be soft-hearted and feel uncomfortable all over. Those who dare to be extravagant will become unorthodox or wild fox Zen. In the end, their immortality and freedom aren't really free in my opinion. As for the Confucian school of sacrificing oneself for righteousness, it's even more like a scholar's cage. In the end, it's only the martial arts who prove their Tao through strength that's refreshing. The man frowned and said, You still haven't gotten to the point. Hong Jingyan, who didn't have any edge to speak of today, laughed softly and said, Let's not talk about this. Give me a definite answer. When the 2 countries are at war again, I'll go to your place to stay. The middle-aged man didn't comment. Hong Jingyan didn't feel that he was being neglected or underestimated. He leaned lazily on the back of the chair and said slowly, His Majesty has been purging the Jianghu for many years. It's time for flowers and fruits to blossom. When the time comes, there will be many outstanding Jianghu people like the Sword Emperor of Shishu on the battlefield. It's tragic. It'll be good if only 1 out of 10 of them survive. I really feel bad for them. The dark and taciturn man interlocked his fingers and still didn't say a word. Hong Jingyan suddenly asked, Do you think the 2 of us can sneak into the palace of the Liang dynasty and take the head of the Zhao family's son? Why don't we go to Bailiang and kill Su Shao? The man glanced at the man who made a name for himself in the chess and sword music school and said lightly, Although I don't know much about Buddhism, I've heard of a saying in the Central Plains, Virtue is 1 foot tall, the devil is 10 feet tall. I'm sure that Wang Xianji of the Martial Emperor City has been waiting for us for a long time. As for Su Shao, he's involved in the tripartite balance of power of Liang Mang and Liang. Since you have ambitions, you can't kill him just because you want to. Besides, you can't kill him anyway. Hong Jingyan sighed. The middle-aged man asked, I heard you lost to her? The chair under Hong Jingyan's feet left the ground as it swayed. This man who had once watched the devil grow up in Luoyang, said with a calm expression, I lost. She paid a big price. She destroyed 126 acupoints and was heartless. She was a living dead. Later, she was shattered by Dong Tai's sword aura. She won't live for long. The man was a little regretful. He stood up and left the Taoist temple. Hong Jingyan was silent for a long time. Finally, he exhaled a long breath. His whole body was soaked in cold sweat. A woman wearing a veil hat and holding a pipa walked in. She sat quietly beside Hong Jingyan. She lifted the veil hat and revealed half of her face. Hong Jingyan glanced at her and asked for a bowl of vegetarian noodles from the Taoist temple. He said, He can know me but you can't. The half-faced woman had a tender face and an old voice. She was as hoarse as an old woman. She's not dead yet. How are you going to settle your debt? Hong Jingyan sneered. Are you and your lover, Zhong Liang, qualified to collect debts for me? The woman pressed a string of the pipa in an instant. Hong Jingyan stretched. Don't be angry with me. You haven't eaten vegetarian noodles and you're already full? Look at how tactful I am. I can't beat that guy, so I'm treating him to a meal. The number of people Hong Jingyan couldn't beat could be counted on one hand. And the Maha-Bodhisattva who could make Hong Jingyan feel as if he was facing a great enemy had already crossed the Yellow River and headed to the Arctic tundra. Chapter 609. Enjoying happiness together was a rare good thing. Taking a step back, Having someone to bear hardships with was not bad either. The supervisor of the Yenyang temple had this kind of mentality. Eating and sleeping in the open with a scholar surnamed Su, it was a fortunate thing for him to have a companion to chat with on this trip. Jiuwei Taoist Luo Pingyang was confident in his ability to read people's faces. Although this scholar's face and aura did not match, revealing an unfathomable oddity, no matter how bad he was, he would not be a bad person. Besides, he and his disciple were not worth the effort of others to swindle and cheat them. Even if they made meat buns, it would not be more than 200 caddies of meat. Over time, some small secrets were no longer hidden. Su Fengnian gradually knew that this unknown supervisor of the small Taoist temple was very attentive in teaching. He taught his disciple how to practice qi along the way. About a few times when they stopped at a place to rest, Su Fengnian paid for it out of his own pocket. The old Taoist did not mind him watching and listening. Today, the young disciple followed his master's instructions and sat cross-legged in the shade of a rock by the Ruoshui River. His legs were crossed in the Vajra posture of Buddhism, which was the wishful posture in Taoism. The old Taoist carefully fished out a few yellowed books from the bookbox and handed them to Su Fengnian. He stroked his beard and smiled. To tell you the truth, when I was young, my family was well off and I read many books. There was an elder in my family who liked Elder Huang and studied Taoism. I followed that elder to practice qi for a few years. Later, my family declined and I did not want to give up halfway, so I joined the Taoist temple and became a receptionist. These years, I read all the classics of Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. It was not easy to pick out these 3 books, which I thought would not lead the disciples astray. Su Fengnian took a look. It was the 6 Wonders Gate from Tiantai sect, the continuation of meditation from Yuan Fan, a wandering immortal from the spring and autumn period, and the last book was the Theory of Bodhi Dao from the Huang sect. These 3 books were somewhat obscure to ordinary people, but for people of the 3 sects, it was not difficult to get their hands on them. However, the classics of Buddhism and Taoism were as vast as smoke. To be able to pick out these 3 books was enough to prove that the old Taoist was not a fake Taoist who casually put on a Taoist robe. The 3 books were steady and proper, describing the method of meditation step by step. They were not like many scriptures that pretended to say things like, "Return to Buddha for a lifetime," or "I want to leave this world," which were deliberately mystifying and playing tricks with the words. Of course, if Director Luo wanted to rely on these 3 books that anyone could buy and copy at home to cultivate the method of immortality, it was definitely a fool's dream. However, if one cultivated the method properly and diligently, they could, to a certain extent, get rid of diseases and prolong life. It was rare for the old Taoist to meet someone who was willing to listen to him show off his cultivation experience, so he was very leisurely. He pointed at his disciple's back, intending to give this young man some pointers. "Young Master Su, look at my disciple's back. His back is straight like the stacking of a plate. This is very particular." The old Taoist kept him in suspense and asked with a smile, "Young Master Su, have you ever seen ginseng before?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I've only seen it a few times by luck." The old Taoist narrowed his eyes and clicked his tongue. "That's good stuff. When I was young, I followed my elders to cultivate and saw a few old ginseng that were picked from the Liangliao region of the Liang dynasty. They were as thick as an arm." Hey, I'm off topic. Let's not talk about this. A real man doesn't boast about his past achievements. In short, all living things are born with spirits, especially ginseng. A ginseng's branches must be curled into knots in order to cultivate its origin and prevent its essence from leaking out. It's the same for us Taoists when we meditate and breathe. Also, when we meditate, we have to gently lick our tongues against the roof of our mouths, and babies who haven't grown teeth yet fall asleep. All in all, these are just the foundation of cultivation. In fact, they haven't crossed the threshold yet, so it's difficult to enter the room. This poor Taoist has read all kinds of books, and whenever I have spare money, I'll buy books from the broken-down aristocratic families. In the books, there are thousands of beauties. This poor Taoist is an outsider who only wants to find immortality in piles of paper. After so many years, I don't dare to say that I've really cultivated anything. Taoism relies on breathing in qi, and there's a saying that there are 12 floors. However, this poor Taoist has only cultivated 5 or 6 floors. Alas, that's why there's a saying that cultivating is like entering Shu, and it's really as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Some people who burn incense praised me as a Taoist master and an immortal. It's really shameful. This time, Taoist Master Qilin spread a rumor that the Tao De sect is going to repair the Taoist canon and gather all the Taoist books in the world. I'm not afraid that young Master Su will laugh at me, but this poor Taoist is not going to the Water and Land Taoist Temple. I just want to go to any of the Taoist temples in the Tao De sect to help with the chores. Not to mention other things, I'll be satisfied if I can take a few glances at some of the incomplete books. As for the trivial matters like accommodation and food, this poor Taoist and my disciple can deal with it. The old Taoist's disciple was swaying and dizzy. He was exhausted physically and mentally and was about to fall asleep. He looked like he was powerless to sit still. The old Taoist was very nervous. He whispered to Su Fengnian, "This poor Taoist's disciple's innate talent is not bad. It's 10,000 times better than this poor Taoist. Look at him. This is the sign of his sea of qi rising. No matter when he opens or closes his eyes, there will be scenes of fireflies or hooks and chains. It proves that he has achieved a small success in his cultivation. When this poor Taoist cultivated the two great supernatural powers of hearing and seeing, he suffered a lot to pass this stage. At first, he recklessly used guarding intent to upper Dantian. For a moment, his face was flushed red and he thought that he had achieved a success in his cultivation. Later on, he realized that he had gone astray. Now that I've returned to teach my disciple the mental cultivation method, he won't take too many detours." Taoist Master Luo was talking excitedly. He didn't expect that his disciple almost fell down. He said weakly, "Master, I'm hungry." Chapter 6:10. His disciple's betrayal made the old Taoist lose face. He was so angry that he smashed a chestnut on the child's head. "Eat, eat, eat, you only know how to eat. You're such a glutton who doesn't make progress." If there were no outsiders present, the child would not mind being scolded and beaten by his master. However, he did not have a good impression of the young scholar from the moment he met him. Now he felt that he had lost a lot of face and stared at Taoist Luo with red eyes. As the master of the small monastery, he did not have the bearing of an expert. He shouted and stretched out his hand and then hit his disciple's palm more than 10 times. The child could not stand the beating and the old man patted with all his strength. The little hand instantly turned red, feeling pain and grievance. He cried loudly and glanced at the scholar who was not pleasing to his eyes. He felt even more heartbroken. He got up and squatted by the side of the river, picking up stones and throwing them into the river. The old Taoist said to Su Fengnian sincerely, "In Taoist cultivation, even if you see fireflies and chains, if you do not follow the right path, you will still be regarded as a light and shadow door by the Zen sect. Half of this is because Buddhism starts with the mind and does not pay attention to the training of the body. There is also no Taoist inner elixir, so it is regarded as an obstacle. The other half is that there is indeed the suspicion of Qigong deviation. If young master has the intention to study meditation, you cannot ignore it. However, I am also a blind person who is trying to cross the river blindly. In my own words, I am borrowing fake cultivation. I am afraid that I will be laughed to death by the enlightened people in the monastery. I am limited by my aptitude and have not been able to smell the sandalwood fragrance. Not to mention those who have attained Tao and ascended, even those who have little immortality are out of reach. This disciple of mine is also a child with a hard life. Although he is not sensible, his foundation and mind are not bad. I just want him to suffer less in the future. Young Master Su, please do not blame him for his long face. The child is too young. After walking for thousands of miles, the soles of his feet have changed a few layers of calluses. Since young, he has treated Yenyang Monastery as his home. He can never be happy." Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. "Supervisor Luo, you are too serious. I am not good with children. Which family's children rarely have a good face when they see me?" Taoist Luo sighed softly. "We are like a cup of muddy water. After it is still, we see the dirt at the bottom of the cup. When one is sick, one will know the suffering of the body. When one is healthy, one will be busy in the midst of chaos." Su Fengnian pondered for a moment, then nodded and said, "An empty room looks clean, but only when the sun shines through the window will one know that there is a myriad of dust. Once a person of Taoism enters the first stage, he will reach the profound realm. I'm afraid that this is the comprehension gained from this movement and stillness." After ascending to the Vajra realm, regardless of whether he was observing waterfalls or rivers, he would still be able to faintly see some kind of trace left behind. If he were to reach the finger profound realm, would he be able to produce a kind of foresight? Su Fengnian was lost in thought. In the Emperor Qin's mausoleum, Luo Yang's painstaking efforts outside the bronze door had given him a great shock. Taoist Luo pondered for a while, then said with a face full of fascination, "First stage, I dare not think about it." The three of them had been walking northwest along the Ruo River. Every time they stopped to rest, they would sleep by the water under the starry sky. The last time they rested, Su Fengnian would be separated from this pair of master and disciple the next day. The latter would rush to the Yellow River and take a boat upstream along the Yellow River to participate in the huge water and land dojo of the Tao Te Dao sect. Su Fengnian, on the other hand, did not need to make a turn. After walking for another half an hour, he would be able to see the final target of this trip to Beimang. On this night, the two seasons of summer and autumn converged. The stars hung in the sky, and the Milky Way shone brightly overhead. The northern sky was so low that it seemed almost within reach. Su Fengnian sat by the Ruo River in a daze. He collected his thoughts and turned his head to look. Taoist Luo's little disciple was standing not far away, hesitating. When he saw Su Fengnian looking at him, he turned around and ran. However, after running for a dozen steps, he stopped and turned back to walk unwillingly toward the river. The child's dislike of Su Fengnian was written all over his face. He did not know why he was willing to take the initiative to talk tonight. After sitting down, the two of them were silent. Finally, the child could not hold it in and asked, "Su, have you heard of the saying, 'Virtue is 1 foot tall, and the devil is 10 feet tall'?" Su Fengnian nodded. The child frowned and asked seriously, 10 feet is always better than 1 foot, right? Every time I ask Master why the devil is 9 feet taller than the Tao, he can't give me an answer and always changes the topic. Do you understand?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I don't really understand." The child twisted his mouth and said disdainfully, "You don't have much knowledge. You don't even know how to meditate. You need my master to teach you." Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Your master is very knowledgeable. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the supervisor of your Yenyang temple. It's not shameful that I can't compare to him." The child said proudly, "Everyone says that my master's fortune-telling is accurate." Su Fengnian looked at the Ruo Shui that was swaying on the surface of the river under the starlight and did not make a sound. The child told the truth. "Before Master went to bed, he told me to come and thank you. I didn't want to at first, but he is my master. I have to listen to him." Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, "You are an honest person." The child was no longer willing to pay attention to this guy. He put his head on his bent knees and looked at the Ruo Shui in a daze. He turned his head and said slowly, "That day at the crossing of the river, I really did see a female water ghost wearing red robes. Do you believe it?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "I believe it." As he spoke, a smear of red swam in the Ruo Shui and disappeared. Su Fengnian thought for a while and took out a stack of straw sandals from the bookbox. There were 3 pairs. He took out 2 pairs and gave them to the child. "I only made 1 pair. After I saw you guys, I made 2 more pairs. If you don't mind, take it as a parting gift." The child was surprised. He hesitated for a moment but still took the 2 pairs of straw sandals. At this moment, he didn't hate the scholar in front of him as much. The child hugged the straw sandals and asked curiously, "You also know how to weave straw sandals? Who are you giving them to?" Su Fengnian looked calmly at the water and said softly, "You have a master. I also have a master." Chapter 6:11. Taoist Luo opened his eyes early in the morning, but did not find his sleepy disciple. It was strange that this little brat was so angry even when he woke up. He got up and looked over, only to find his disciple holding a tree branch and messing around by the river. Messing around? Taoist Luo quickly changed his mind and walked over with his hands behind his back. He saw his disciple with a good foundation holding a tree branch in his hand. Every time he condensed his qi, his movements were smooth like a dragon or a snake. Taoist Luo's eyes widened. Could this brat really be so talented that he could comprehend swordsmanship by looking at the water and learn it by himself? But Taoist Luo remembered that he did not teach him swordsmanship at all. It was not because he was afraid that teaching his disciple would starve his master, but because Taoist Luo knew nothing about swordsmanship. Taoist Luo did not see young Master Su's figure. He waited until his disciple stopped, sweating profusely. Then he asked as if he had seen a ghost, "How did you learn swordsmanship?" This piece of charcoal snorted and brandished his sword with a withered branch. He grinned and said, "Young Master Su praised my constitution and taught me this sword move. I'm thinking that when we return to Yenyang Monastery, Senior Martial Brother Qing Yan won't be my match." Speaking of that old man who relied on his strength and age and his master who was from the same sect as the temple dean, the child was especially vengeful. He always wanted to beat him up after he learned some peerless martial arts. Taoist Luo frowned and asked, "That young Master Su also knows swordsmanship?" The child shook his head and said, "I don't think so. Before he taught me this move last night, he said that he read it from an ancient manual with a missing page. I think he thought that he could not learn it, so he taught it to me. When I become a top swordsman in the future, he will be proud." The child remembered something and ran to the river bank. He picked up 2 pairs of straw sandals and said with a smile, "Master, he gave this to us. Before he left, he asked me to pass a message to you. He said that he liked your poem and that it was the words of a benevolent person. He also said that the sword moves the mountains to restore peace." In the end, he said that he had memorized all 32 poems and that he would read them to his second sister when he returned. Anyway, that fellow nagged on, but that was all I could remember. Later on, I was too preoccupied with practicing my sword and forgot some. Anyway, I didn't really understand. The old Taoist pretended that he was about to hit, but how could the child be afraid of this kind of bravado that he had seen for many years? He held the branch like a sword and pushed the straw sandals towards his master's arms. He said flatteringly, "I'll go back to the book box. Master, remember, I will be a swordsman in the future. Just wait for my sword to move the mountains." Taoist Luo smiled helplessly. "Brat, remember my kindness." The child dashed forward, his laughter crisp and clear. "I know." Taoist Luo lowered his head and looked at the straw sandals in his hands. He shook his head and sighed. "When we went to bed, we parted ways with the sandals. Who knew that we would never meet again after we closed our eyes?" Su Fengnian walked alone on the shore of the Ruo River. He wore a green python robe and a red robe floated leisurely. Otherworldly items naturally liked water and hated fire. When the otherworldly items Yuanying saw water, they would be happy. From time to time, their heads would float to the surface of the water with a fish in their mouths. They would face Su Fengnian on the shore with their mouths full of blood. Su Fengnian was too lazy to care about them. Of course, that pair of master and disciple didn't know that if it wasn't for him secretly stopping them when they were crossing the river, the man holding the sheepskin raft would have been dragged into the water and become the otherworldly item's meal. It wasn't wrong for the child to treat him as a water ghost. The sword technique that Su Fengnian taught the child that night was the majestic opening shoe style. However, with the master and disciple's background, even if the child practiced the sword every day, he wouldn't be able to grasp half of the essence of that sword technique. Since ancient times, it was hard to find a good master, and even harder to find a wise master. There was a huge gap between the 4th grade of martial master and the 2nd grade of master. The 1st grade was as high as Wei Tian Men. Taoist Luo could be considered as someone who was determined. He was also a supervisor of the Taoist temple. He spent his whole life tirelessly searching for the art of immortality. However, even now, he hadn't completed half of the 12 floors of the Taoist temple. This was the real Jianghu. Some people were so poor that they couldn't even touch a single coin. Some people were so rich that they couldn't even look at a mountain of gold. Su Fengnian suddenly stopped and squatted on the ground. He took out the things in the book box to bask in the sun. It was like exchanging a Nanzhao sword for the spring and autumn sword from the Western Shu orphan. Su Fengnian could only use 50% to 60% of the sword qi. That time when they met in a narrow alley in the rain, he almost died under the wild beat of the blind female zither player. The black box containing the 3 ancient swords of the great Qin dynasty was flipped over the dragon wall into the mausoleum of the Emperor Qin. That white robe. A spring thunder. Did the face of the white fox climb the stairs? A saber manual, stopped at the knot of black hair. The soft armor on his body that he couldn't take off during his last 2 travels. 12 flying swords. The sword embryo of the dewdrop golden thread Taya sword was completed. A pair of straw sandals that he didn't know if he could give away. This work was learned from old Huang. He remembered the first time the old man with missing front teeth handed over a pair of straw sandals. Su Fengnian stomped his feet and cursed. Were these considered shoes? Later, he felt that straw sandals were better than walking barefoot. He got used to wearing them. That time when he just returned to Baelyong Palace and put on the comfortable jade shoes again, he was actually not used to it. As the heir of a feudal lord, he could get a lot of rare things for no reason. However, Su Fengnian also unknowingly risked his life to get some things. At the same time, as time passed, he lost a lot of things that couldn't be retained no matter how hard he tried. He couldn't talk about how many hardships he had suffered. If he talked about it, people would only think that he was greedy and didn't know how to be content. It was like he was talking to a hungry man about meat and greasy food. Therefore, he could only say that he enjoyed a lot of luck when he met people. Su Fengnian put the books back into the box one by one. The nascent soul of the otherworldly item came to the shore and looked at this guy with pity. Under Su Zhao's personal supervision, the Liang dynasty had once built an unprecedentedly huge posthouse network. The posthouse was the point, and the posthouse was the line. The line was supplemented by beacons, military towns, and Wu Castle. It was a piece of land that looked daunting. Today, the eastern border of Liang dynasty almost completely copied the original framework. Baymang, which had absorbed a large number of people from the Central Plains, also spared no effort to engrave the proven effective war framework. Among them, there were a total of 100 beacon towers in Jiayu County of Longyao Province, where Maolong was located. They were distributed according to 3 lines, one for every 10 miles. They were continuous and connected to each other. Every time there was a war, the smoke would rise one after another. The Empress once patrolled the border at night. When she felt like it, she climbed the beacon tower and lit the 4 torches herself. The next moment, the whole province was ablaze with lights. The 3 beacon towers were like 3 fire dragons. That night, when they found out that a beacon tower was negligent, 9 people, including the commander and deputy commander, were beheaded on the spot. The commander of the beacon tower was demoted to an ordinary beacon tower, and he would never be promoted again. Baymang had a few courier routes that were only used by the military. Once, there was a powerful imperial relative who privately owned salt and iron. He collided with a group of cavalry from the southern dynasties in Longyao province and was killed. The news was somehow leaked. When the Empress killed this nephew of hers, she said that smuggling salt and iron didn't have to die, but riding a horse on the courier route deserved to die twice. Then, this person's young legitimate son was dragged out of his home and hanged to death. From then on, there were no more miscellaneous people passing through these courier routes. The courier route leading to the military town of Ligu was already full of frightened birds. The 4,000 cavalrymen galloped all the way, destroying all the courier stations and beacon towers without exception. Everyone knew that the 6,000 soldiers defending Ligu were like turtles in a jar. They didn't dare to retreat or fight. Tiezhu and Gentleman's Hall were examples of what happened to them. Tiezhu took the initiative to attack. Before Ligu reached Maolong, they had no choice but to take on the cruel mission of sacrificing their lives to wear down the lone army. They could only pray that the great generals of the southern dynasties could quickly come up with a countermeasure. After 2 battles, the once arrogant southern dynasties no longer had any military towns that could match the strength of the elite troops of Baelyong. Ligu was facing a disaster, and everyone was in a state of panic. In addition, the city was sealed. Many of the descendants of the noble families who couldn't leave the city either hugged their heads and cried bitterly. Because of the martial law, the people who were kept in the dock were not as disheartened as the well-informed nobles and gentry. Ligu was uncomfortable, and Maolong was also grieving for the death of the rabbit. Many families in the city took advantage of the fact that the city had not been sealed and fled north with their families. It was like the scene of the scholars fleeing north in the spring and autumn period. It was all because of the Baelyong army and the butchers. Maolong's Ladder Mountain Beacon Tower. Built on the peak of a hill, it was sturdy and rammed with thick red willow branches. The tower was tall and large. Because this mountain was close to the important border town of Maolong, the Ladder Mountain Beacon Tower was equipped with an extra 3 men. There were 12 men in one tower. In the past few years, the Baelyong of the various provinces didn't care about the northern dynasties and only used people from the northern dynasties. People from the southern dynasties were not allowed to be the Baelyong. It was only in the recent 2 years that they were allowed to enter the Baelyong. Then, the 2 sides quickly became equal. Many people complained about this. The 12 men in the Ladder Mountain Beacon Tower were evenly split between the northern and southern dynasties. 2 of the 3 men were from the southern dynasties, and the other one was a rough man. He couldn't compete with the other 2 and was pushed aside. This made the Mang Baelyong very embarrassed. He was getting worse and worse. Previously, he dared to secretly drink a few mouthfuls of wine. Now that he was caught, he was whipped. Chapter 6:12. The two sway marshals of the Southern dynasty liked to order him around when they had nothing to do. They even threw all the hard work of late-night duty to him. The only time he got angry was when his beautiful daughter came to visit. She was stopped by the sway marshals halfway and was dragged into the forest. The other Fengzi were also curious about how such a good-for-nothing could give birth to such a beautiful daughter. If she was unlucky enough to take after her father, she would be too big and she would never be able to get married. As for whether the deputy sway marshal succeeded or failed, the outsiders could only guess. The Fengzi of the Southern dynasty despised him and the Fengzi of the Northern court hated him. The Fengzi of the Northern court hated him. The Fengzi of the Northern court also hated him. The Fengzi of the Southern court looked down on him and the Fengzi of the Northern court also hated him. The Fengzi of the Southern court looked down on him and the Fengzi of the Northern court also hated him. The Fengzi of the Southern court looked down on him and the Fengzi of the Northern court also hated him. The Fengzi of the Southern court was the only one who could talk to the Fengzi of the latter mountain. The new Fengzi was called Yuan Huai. In the Southern court, Yuan had the surname Yi. It was also one of the few big surnames. However, no one thought that the son of such a big family would be willing to be a Fengzi who was destined to have no military achievements. Yuan Huai was not on duty during the day. Since the Fengzi of the Fengzi stopped drinking outside the Fengzi, he had nowhere to go. He always stood in the dark inside the Fengzi tower and looked outside. He did not get tired of it even after many years. Yuan Huai was a Fengzi with delicate features and a slim waist like a woman. Everyone in the ladder mountain knew that the sway marshal liked both men and women. They all wondered if this Fengzi of the Yuan Huai exchanged his but for the Fengzi position. Although the Fengzi of the Fengzi was a job with no benefits and no future compared to the regular border army, it was still much more comfortable than many other jobs. At least, they would not starve and they would not fall behind in their monthly salary. Yuan Huai did not look at the Fengzi and asked, "How many Fengzi do you think there are in the Liang dynasty?" The Fengzi of the Fengzi, who was not old but had an old appearance, said with a hoarse voice, "I'm not sure now. There should be 12,000 in the past 5 to 6 years. Yuan Huai touched the green headscarf on his head and asked curiously, "I heard from Marshal Sui that the Liang dynasty's beacons would light a torch every day to announce their safety. Why don't we do the same?" The old beacon master with a bitter expression said softly, "In order to pacify the spring and autumn 8 kingdoms, we must rely on this fire of peace to send messages to Great Peace City." Yuan Huai laughed and said, "That Emperor of Liang must be tired. If he doesn't see the Taiping fire one day, he won't be able to sleep. He'll have to summon the civil and military officials to the forbidden area." Old Wind Beacon replied calmly, "Nothing is tiring. The Empress had personally decreed that the entire territory of Beimang would not report the fire of peace. When it's not safe, I'll light up the smoke signal. Zhen will still give you peace." How conceited! Yuan Huai sighed and rubbed his face, which had become much darker and rougher after he became the son of a beacon. The steps of the ancestral hall must be covered with moss. Old Beacon remained silent. Yuan Huai said to himself, "If we were at home, I'd like to catch some candlelight bugs and put them into a bag to make a firefly bag. Then I can study at night without the light." He turned his head and joked, "Old Xiang, your daughter is so beautiful, like a fairy in a painting. Why don't you marry me?" The old man gave a rare smile, but did not say whether it was good or not. Yuan Huai stared and said, "Give me a definite answer, aren't you a man?" Old Beacon shook his head. Yuan Huai turned his head and muttered, "Petty." Yuan Huai was a rough person. He immediately asked, "Old Xiang, when do you think I can become Marshal Sui?" Old Beacon stared at him for a while, then turned his head and said, "You? No way." Yuan Huai said anxiously, "Why can't I?" Old Beacon said softly, "Being an official requires you to hide your abilities, like a woman's chest." Yuan Huai was stunned for a moment, then he laughed loudly and said, "Oh, you know how to reason?" Old Beacon said calmly, "As long as you're a man, you'll understand a few things, especially an old man like me." Yuan Huai rolled his eyes and said, "Talking to you is boring." A young beacon walked in and ordered the old man arrogantly, "Old Xiang, go with me to the market and bring a few jugs of wine. I'll owe you the wine money first." Old Fengzi remained silent and was about to leave Feng Shui to buy wine for his colleagues. As for the money that these Fengzi owed him, It would accumulate over time. Not to mention 50 taels of silver, 30 to 40 taels of silver would definitely not run away. However, he was just a pile of mud that was used to being bullied by others. Yuan Huai couldn't stand it anymore, so he tried to smooth things over for Old Xiang. Old Beacon glared at Yuan Huai angrily. Yuan Huai's palm-sized face, sharp chin, and soft skin made him look like a woman. His anger dissipated, but he also felt a fire burning in his lower abdomen. However, this Yuan Huai was most likely Marshal Sui's plaything, so he didn't dare to be presumptuous no matter how bold he was. However, it was good to have some fun. He said he was a good brother and was about to put his arm around Yuan Huai's shoulder, but Yuan Huai nimbly dodged him and slipped away. Fengzi, who was waiting for his death on the ladder mountain, was greatly disappointed. He glared at Yuan Zhou's buttocks and cursed himself inwardly for missing his wife so much that he went crazy. Then he turned around and looked at that wretched old bastard, spat out a mouthful of thick phlegm, and walked out swaggeringly. Feng Shui of the ladder mountain had 2 horses. One of them was given to Marshal Sui to ride to the military town of Maolong. The wine market was about 20 miles away. Yuan Huai told Feng Zi, who was guarding the horses, that he was going to treat all his brothers to a drink so he could ride down the mountain. Chapter 6:13. When they went down the mountain, Yuan Huai passed by a small group of cavaliers from the border town. The leader was a handsome guy who looked like the guy in the beacon. When he saw Yuan Huai, he had a playful look in his eyes and whistled. Yuan Huai suppressed his disgust and spurred his horse forward. There were a total of 6 riders in the group. A rider who was half a horse's length away from the leader asked softly, "Aren't we going to kill them?" The leader, who was still frivolous a moment ago, narrowed his eyes and shook his head slightly. "We'll kill them later. Remember, there may be more than 9 beacon princes near the important town." The handsome rider snorted. "Brother Hanlin, we've killed our way here. We've already destroyed 7 beacon princes. We're well aware of the situation." Li Hanlin, who had become colder in silence, exhaled. "It's never a bad thing to be careful. We can't lose our lives in Beimang again. Once we get rid of this beacon, we won't have anything else to do. After we go back." Li Hanlin did not continue. How many of them could go back? Li Shuriyue bit his cracked lips. His eyes were cold as he nodded heavily. There was a checkpoint about half a li away from the ladder mountain Fengyi. A Fengzi was dozing off under the shade of a tree. He did not even wake up from the sound of hooves that were not wrapped in a soft cloth. Fortunately, a crossbow arrow pierced through his head and nailed into the tree trunk. The Fengzi did not die in pain. His head only shook slightly. The rider deliberately stopped at the checkpoint and then slowly went up the mountain. There were 2 beacon princes from the southern dynasty who were joking around outside the beacon. They were waiting for Yuan Huai to buy wine to satisfy their cravings. When they saw the rider in Maolong light armor lazily appear in their field of vision, they thought he was a soldier looking for an acquaintance. They squeezed out a smile and went forward to flatter him. The 6 riders dismounted at the same time. Li Hanlin smiled and put his arm around one of the beacon prince's shoulders as he walked towards the beacon. He asked casually, "Is your Marshal Sui here? I finally got the chance to sneak out to take a breather. We agreed to go to Maolong to drink wine tonight. Don't stand me up. If the Bailiang really attacks, I don't even know if I'll be dead or alive. I'd better find some women and have some fun." Feng Zi was drooling with envy in his heart, but he smiled and said, "Yes, yes, yes. Sir, you're right. If you trust me, this humble one will be bold enough to lead the way for you. I am very familiar with the brothels in Maolong." Stepping into the shadow of the fire beacon, Li Hanlin laughed heartily. "You're smart. I like it." He was on the right track. He was really on the path to the underworld. At the same time, October Li broke the neck of another first wind beacon. Li Hanlin signaled Lu Do with his eyes. Lu Do held a dagger in his mouth and a spear pouch hanging from his waist. He leaped high and hooked his hands into the sway wall. He climbed up swiftly and quietly. There were 50 crossbowmen, but there were only 6 of them left. Corporal Li Hanlin, Corporal Lu Do, October Li, and 3 other elite crossbowmen who had swapped their cold sabers for Mang sabers. Among them, Lu Do was no longer equipped with a saber. Inside the sway wall, Li Hanlin was in a killing frenzy. He thought that everything had been settled, except for the female first wind beacon who rode down the mountain. He ordered Lu Do and October Li to search the sway wall for a secret room. Unexpectedly, an old first wind beacon ambushed Li Hanlin from a hidden spot. At that time, Li Hanlin was about to retrieve some records of the Sui wall. In the end, Ma Zhenjai blocked the sinister saber for him. The sharp saber stabbed a Bail young man through the heart. The first wind beacon was obviously a master. When he pulled out his saber, it drew an arc and tore open the man's heart. Before he died, Ma Zhenjai said that he wanted to return to Bailiang and take some money to give to the parents, wives, and children of his fallen brothers. The first wind beacon struck his saber swiftly and fiercely. Li Hanlin struggled to parry and was hit in the shoulder by the first wind beacon. Fortunately, before he could exert his strength, the first wind beacon was punched in the back by Lu Do, who had rushed over after hearing the sound. As if that wasn't enough, Lu Do pressed the first wind beacon's head and smashed it against the wall. The first wind beacon's head was like a watermelon when it fell to the ground. Lu Do looked at Li Hanlin, who shook his head and said that he was fine. Li Hanlin walked over to Ma Zhenjai's corpse and squatted down to help him close his eyes. Li October's lips moved, but he still did not make a sound. Li Hanlin calmly said, "Lu Do, you are good at tracking. Ride my horse with the best legs and go after that Feng Zi who went down the mountain. Remember, you only have to chase for 20 li. If you can't catch him, immediately turn back and meet us at the first beacon." Lu Do silently walked out of the beacon. Li October's fist pounded on the wall. Li Hanlin raised his head and said, "Our Longxiang army has no intention of eating Li Gu. Let's see who will fall into the trap of Li Gu Maolong." Dong Zhuo personally led 8,000 cavalrymen to gallop day and night toward Maolong. From the very beginning, he was prepared to abandon Li Gu. Fatso Dong only looked fat, but in fact, he was the kind of sturdy man who was not the least bit bloated. He rode at the front. There was a constant stream of cavalry coming to report the military situation. Of the 80 cavalrymen under Dong Zhuo's command, Bei Mang was the number one. The 8,000 elite cavalrymen of the Southern Dynasty were second to none. Their momentum was like a rainbow. Dong Zhuo habitually clenched his teeth, a haze appearing in his eyes. Half an hour later, none of the 100 cavalrymen returned. Finally, a cavalryman galloped over. His body was covered in blood and his back was full of arrows. Dong Zhuo whipped his horse to stop him from dismounting to report the military situation. "Sit down and talk." This dying cavalryman had blood seeping out of his mouth. He tried his best to speak clearly. 3 li ahead, there is a heavy ambush." After saying this, he died. Dong Zhuo stretched out his arm to support the corpse, not letting him fall off the horse. He exhaled a long breath, clenched his fist and raised his arm. The whole army was solemn. Their fighting spirit was high. Dong Zhuo did not move. A large banner with the character Dong flapped in the wind. The front was also called the mouth of the gourd. The two ends were wide and the middle was narrow. The 100 cavalrymen must have died there. Dong Zhuo had always been very patient. The other side knew that Dong Zhuo's cavalrymen knew about the ambush. Seeing that he did not intend to move forward, they rushed out of the mouth of the gourd. The black mass of cavalrymen spread out like a tide. 4,000 Longxiang army. 8,000 Dong Zhuo's army. Chapter 6:14. The two armies confronted each other. At the front of the formation, a black-clothed youth held 2 corpses in his hands. Before the cavalry behind him could charge, he tossed the corpses high into the air in Dong Zhuo's direction. When they fell to the ground, they turned into 2 puddles of mud. This provocation made the 8,000 cavalry behind the Dong banner gnash their teeth in anger. They tightened their grip on the spears in their hands, subconsciously clamping down on the bellies of their horses. These old soldiers who had been on the battlefield for a long time all took advantage of the gaps to grab their weapons. Once they were embedded in the formation, they would have a higher chance of killing and survival if they grabbed onto their machetes earlier. A large banner with red characters on a black background fluttered in the wind. To the Dong army on the plains facing the wind, the war horses' galloping speed was slowed to a certain degree. However, when the old soldiers raised their heads to look at the scarlet Dong character, they immediately cleared their minds of distracting thoughts. As soon as General Dong gave the order, they would crush this weary army that was barely half their size into ashes. Many of the cavalry silently chanted a simple ballad in their hearts. The sons of the Dong family rode their swords, mounted their spears, and died beside their horses. Dong Zhuo held a green spring spear in his hand. It was once the treasure of Mount Carrying. After Dong Zhuo became his son-in-law, He was given away as a dowry by the mount-carrying mountain's mountain lord. There were 18 cavalry behind Dong Zhuo. Their armor were all normal, but unlike the Dong cavalry, they all held spears in their hands and saddles. Their weapons were in their hands, and more than half of them had swords hanging from their waists. The 18 cavalry didn't have the austere aura unique to old soldiers either. Their attitudes were relatively relaxed, but the commanding officers who were known for their arrogance didn't look down on them in the slightest. In particular, when they looked at the thin old man sitting on horseback empty-handed, they all felt a bit of reverence. After all, not everyone had the ability to sit on the second seat of mount carrying. The youth began to run with a terrifyingly large black tiger. The green spring spear in Dong Zhuo's hand was originally pointed to the ground, but it suddenly rose up and pointed forward. The two armies charged at almost the same time. When the distance between the two cavalry armies was large enough, it didn't mean that whoever charged first would have the advantage. If the distance was too large, after a spurt of energy, morale would begin to decline, and the penetrative power of the first spear would also be damaged. However, in this battle, the distance between the two sides before the collision was enough to ensure that the speed and impact of the horses would be raised to the maximum. The ground trembled under the hooves of the horses, and yellow sand filled the air. The two streams of water moved forward at lightning speed. In normal cavalry battles, regardless of whether it was whistling or shouting, the cavalry liked to make noises to strengthen their momentum when charging. In order to prevent the warhorses from retreating and damaging their speed, some of the cavalry troops who were skilled in horsemanship would throw out a cloth to cover the warhorses' eyes. However, the 4,000 Longxiang army and 8,000 Dong Zhuo army were particularly abnormal. They did not make any unnecessary movements. The riders and warhorses rose and fell at the same time, filling the air with a silent rhythm of iron and blood. Led by 18 riders, more than 60 Bubang mountain martial artists, along with 4,000 war riders, had already charged out. Dong Zhuo stopped his horse and stood still. Behind him were 2,000 roaming riders, while the other 2,000 roaming riders circled around in an arc, avoiding the front. From the left and right, in an all formation, they pierced toward the relatively weak Longxiang army. Dong Zhuo waited quietly for the final decision. The first time the two sides came into contact, both sides penetrated the flesh and bones. A dragon elephant rider and a Dong family cavalryman pierced through their breastplates at almost the same time. Their warhorses continued to charge forward, abandoning their spears and pulling out their blades. When the two passed by, they each hacked out with their blades. The dragon elephant rider chopped off the northern barbarian's head with his blade, ignoring the heavy injury. He tilted his head to avoid the spear. Just as he was about to risk his life to hack out with his blade, the Dong family cavalryman behind him knocked him down with a spear. The spear was squeezed out in an arc in the air. Before the Bailiang cavalryman died, he threw out his cold blade with one hand and grabbed the spear with the other, not allowing the spear tip to be pulled out of his body. The enemy cavalryman let go of his blade, flicking away the cold blade that was flying towards him, and continued to charge forward silently. There were two cavalrymen who collided with their horses. The warhorses' skulls were smashed on the spot. The cavalrymen leaped up from their horses and used the momentum to stab their enemies in the chest. Both sides fell back at the same time, but they still held onto their spears. Before they could fight on foot, the cavalrymen from both sides were ready to pierce their skulls with their spears. Cavalry with astonishing strength could pierce the enemy's cavalrymen down with their spears. They used the remaining momentum of the warhorses' charge to pull out their spears and kill again. A dragon elephant rider ruthlessly pierced through the chests of two northern barbarians. When the two corpses fell from their horses, they still scuttled together like candied haws. He clamped a sharp spear under his armpit and twisted the Dong family cavalryman, who didn't decisively throw away his spear at the first moment, off his horse. He then chopped off half of his head and his entire shoulder. There were also Baimang cavalrymen who fell off their horses and were seriously injured but didn't die. They still chopped off the legs of Bailiang's horses before they died. The two armies strangled each other. In an instant, victory and defeat were decided. Apart from a few officers who excelled in horse fighting and didn't abandon their spears, continuously killing the enemy cavalrymen as they charged forward, it was simply impossible for a cavalryman to advance slowly and be surrounded by more than 10 cavalrymen and be swept away by his spear. It was even more impossible for a cavalryman to turn around and fight another several dozen rounds just because he ran into an evenly matched enemy general. There was only one exception. In the middle of this long battle line, there was still a huge hollow circle that defied common sense. Previously, when the black-clothed youth leaped into the air, he was slapped in the chest by a thin old man who didn't have any weapons in his hands. He fell to the ground with a loud bang. Then, he was entangled by 18 cavalrymen, either on horseback or off their horses. As long as a general personally entered the enemy's line, he was always a striking figure who was destined to be attacked by tides in the spring and autumn period. This kind of character would become a big chopping board nearby, with layers of flesh and blood stacked on top of each other. After the black-clothed and barefoot Su Longxiang led his army into Bei Meng, even though he had been deliberately intercepted at the tiled building, it was still not until today that he was truly stopped in his tracks. The green-clothed old man was Gong Pu, who was second only to one person in Mount Bubang. His internal force was vigorous, and he practiced martial arts with the master of Mount Bubang all year round. The other 17 cavalrymen were all brave men of Mount Bubang. Not to mention there were more than 40 Penglai cauldron-carrying slaves of Mount Bubang. Each of them was 10 feet tall and born with the strength of an ox. After practicing martial arts, they soaked themselves in medicine vats and tempered themselves to the realm of fake Vajra. Unfortunately, they encountered Su Longxiang, who was born with Vajra. As long as they were torn apart by the youth, they would end up being dismembered. In the big circle, there were already more than a dozen Penglai slaves with missing arms and legs lying on the ground. At this time, Su Longxiang ignored the sword of a Mount Bubang swordsman who stabbed him in the back and punched a cauldron-carrying slave in the chest. He slowly pulled out the heart and threw it on the ground. The middle-aged swordsman was shocked when the sharp sword pierced the youth's back. He clearly did not rely on the Qi-Ji to resist the sharp weapon. He immersed himself in the sword for 30 years and was quite conceited. He stabbed the youth's back with the sword in his hand, but no matter how much sword chi he added, it could not penetrate the youth's flesh. The black-clothed youth was slow at times and fast at times. He thought that the green sword was not sharp enough, so he leaned back and took the initiative to move closer to the green light lingering on the tip of the sword. Before the swordsman could let go of the sword, the slightly famous sharp sword in Jianghu was bent in an instant and then broke. The youth leaned back too fast. Not only did the swordsman's sword break, but his whole body was knocked away. His chest was shattered into a mess. He floated backward and fell into the yellow soil, dead. The black tiger looked up to the sky and roared. Under its claws, it clasped the blurred corpse of a Penglai giant. With a light hook, the corpse was smashed and blood soaked the yellow sand. The black tiger pounced on the next burly giant that was closest to it. Gong Pu, who was not in a hurry to fight with the black-clothed youth in close combat, saw this and shouted angrily, "Evil beast!" The black tiger was hit by Gong Pu's palm and flew to the side. After landing, it still slid for 50 or 60 feet. When it stood up, shaking its head, a warrior of Mount Bibing stabbed it with a spear. The spear stabbed into the black tiger's back for a foot. The black tiger did not feel the pain at all. It sank into the ground on all fours. After accumulating strength, it pounced on both the man and the horse. The spear-wielding knight's waist was bitten by the black tiger under Qi Xuanzhen's mount. It was a shocking sight. The divine beast, who was beaten down on the demon-slaying platform and recognized the black-clothed youth as its master, swung its tail as hard as iron. The Penglai slave on the back had a bloody wound from head to chest. It pounced on another giant that was not afraid of death. The latter's face was flushed red. He held the black tiger's mouth and did not let it bite him. The black tiger's whole head smashed down, breaking the giant's arm and smashing his head into the soil. Gong Pu, with a face full of anger, rushed over and kicked the black tiger again. More than a dozen of Liang Mang's cavalry rolled down. Chapter 6:15. Su Longxiang didn't care about the battle at Black Tiger's side at all. With a seemingly casual sweep of his arm, he cut off the waist of a swordsman from Mount Tibing. Pulling the upper body, he spun in an arc and smashed the chest of a giant man carrying a tripod into pieces. A wooden-faced old swordsman's sword was like pear blossom rain. Every time his sword pierced the barefoot youth's body, he would use the rebound of the sword tip to retreat a few feet. Back and forth it was dazzling. In an instant, he had struck more than 90 swords. His hands, feet, head, face, cheeks, heart, and abdomen were all missing. A series of crisp and clear sounds of metal and stone hitting each other were extraordinary. The old swordsman tried to find the crazy youth's Achilles heel when his sword touched his glabella. The young swordsman, who had a fierce reputation after Bei Meng and Luo Yang, grinned and was about to take advantage of the slightly bent sword to move. The swordsman, who had integrated the Taoist's gang-stepping footwork into his body movement, had just taken a step when the youth in front of him punched the side of his left ear. The old swordsman hurriedly used his chi to counteract 70 to 80% of the killing intent, but because of the huge force, his body was lifted off the ground and fell upside down. Su Longxiang held his feet and stabbed them into the ground like throwing a spear into the ground. The swordsman, who had been famous for a long time, was squeezed until his chest was level with the yellow sand. Su Longxiang gently kicked the swordsman's legs and saw the ownerless sword. After hesitating for a moment, he bent down to pick it up and gently threw it up. His palms pressed against the hilt and the tip of the sword. The sword was broken into countless pieces by his palms. Holding the pieces of the sword with both hands, he looked up and saw the two remaining swordsmen. His figure suddenly jumped up and scared the two swordsmen out of their wits. They didn't care about the famous sword and ran away. One of them didn't run fast enough and was hit in the cheek by the black-clothed youth. His mouth was full of fragments and his face was unrecognizable. The other swordsman escaped because of the Penglai giant who sacrificed his life to stop him. However, he was already scared out of his wits. He no longer had any desire to fight. Regardless of whether he would be severely punished by Bingbing Mountain or not, he retreated and disappeared into the cavalry. Su Longxiang was addicted to killing. After tearing apart a giant man, he was about to look for his next target when Gong Pu used a shoulder slam to knock him back a few steps. Gong Pu's hair stood on end as he rushed forward in large strides. His two fists tore through the air, wrapping up the wind and sand as he gave the young man a brazen blow. Su Longxiang's feet left the ground, and he kicked Gong Pu's shoulder. Both of them were pushed back, and after sliding a distance of more than 100 feet, they both stopped at the same time. The two of them were like two armies of cavalry, and they collided. Gong Pu's fist landed on the young man's forehead, and the young man's fist landed on his chest. With the two of them as the center, a large circle of yellow sand wildly drifted outwards. Su Longxiang spat out a mouthful of blood. He smashed his right fist into the palm of his left hand and smiled sinisterly. Blood oozed out of Gong Pu's nostrils, and he gently wiped it away. Once the number of troops exceeded 10,000, and then the whole army fought to the death without a single soldier surrendering. There was no historical record before the spring and autumn period. In the spring and autumn period, there was only the Battle of the Imperial Concubine's Tomb. In that battle, Yuan Zuozong, who was ranked second, was the only one left. He used 16,000 light cavalry to hold back the most elite and majestic 40,000 heavy cavalry of West Chu. This allowed the Su family army, which was not called the Bailiang army at that time, to complete the strategic siege of West Chu, forcing the West Chu army to completely withdraw. Finally, it led to the Battle of the Western Barrier Wall, which was known as the decisive battle of the spring and autumn period. In that battle, on top of the Imperial Concubine's Tomb, there were 16 soldiers around Yuan Zuozong who were protecting the White Bear. All of them were ordinary soldiers, because more than 30 generals had already died. At the beginning of that battle, Yuan Zuozong took the lead. From the cavalry battle to the infantry battle, he killed 16 enemy generals. With one silver spear, he killed more than 170 enemy cavalry. If Chen Zhibao did not disobey the order and led the troops to rescue him, Yuan Zuozong was doomed to die in the Imperial Concubine's Tomb. When the white-robed Chen Zhibao walked to the tomb, Yuan Zuozong stood with his hands on his spear. His whole body was covered in blood, and his face could not be seen. Generally speaking, when 1/3 of the military strength was lost, the morale of the army would begin to collapse. In the spring and autumn period, there were countless ambitious and ruthless people who took advantage of the chaotic times to rise up. When they had a little bit of momentum, they hurriedly proclaimed themselves as kings and emperors. However, when these mixed-up armies met the elite regular army, they often collapsed at the first touch. There was no lack of absurd battles where 50 to 60,000 rebels were chased by thousands of cavalry for hundreds of miles, let alone fighting to the death. The powerful officials of the Liang dynasty all had their own ulterior motives. They said that if Gu Jiantang sat in the position of Su Shao, he could also stabilize the spring and autumn period. However, they never thought that Gu Jiantang could bring out such a valiant general like Yuan Zuozong. After the spring and autumn period was stabilized, the morale of the Bailiang army was still high. The battle at the mouth of the gourd was tragic. After noon, the two armies began their charge and fought until dusk. The yellow sand filled the mouth of the gourd and did not stop for a moment. The 4,000 Longxiang army and the 6,000 Dongzhuo army almost changed from a cavalry battle to an infantry battle. If one did not see it with their own eyes, no one would believe it. The reason why Dongzhuo was able to take over 3 military towns in the South Dynasty and dared to argue with a few generals in the South Dynasty was because he had 60,000 troops under his banner. When the Empress was patrolling the border, she personally asked Dongzhuo if he was willing to exchange 60,000 troops for a king of the South courtyard. What she meant was that Dongzhuo's 60,000 troops could take out 60,000 of Bailiang's 300,000 cavalry. As for how Dongzhuo, who was as cunning as a fox, would reply, no one knew. Although Dongzhuo's face was as calm as water, the corner of his mouth seemed to be smiling. The 2,000 roaming cavalry behind him did not enter the battle. The complete system of the Northern Mang's Western Line's relay post, beacon post, and military town seemed to be perfect, but in the end, it had never been tainted by the blood of war. It was flashy but impractical. Dongzhuo had always seen it with his eyes and was well aware of it, but he had never once mentioned it in the imperial court. For example, this time, the 8,000 Longxiang army penetrated deep into the enemy's territory alone. They actually fought all the way to the military town without a wisp of smoke. After swallowing Gentleman's Restaurant, there was a short period of smoke from the beacon. However, the South Dynasty was blinded again. Wherever the Longxiang army's horses pointed, there was no news from the hundreds of beacons in front of Gu Maolong. Even Dongzhuo himself did not expect that the 4,000 Longxiang army would not attack Gu Maolong. Instead, they would run all the way to ambush and kill the reinforcements. If it were not for the 8,000 troops that he had trained, he was afraid that the Longxiang army would not even leave a bone behind. Dongzhuo was still waiting. In this sudden battle, although his cavalry had galloped all the way to reinforce Gu Maolong, it could not be said that they were waiting at ease. However, compared to the Longxiang army that had experienced 2 fierce battles, they still had the advantage. Dongzhuo thought that 4,000 against 4,000 would fall into a disadvantage. However, he did not expect that the 2,000 roaming cavalry would participate in the battle and still not be able to defeat the Longxiang army that was like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Dongzhuo raised his butt. He could vaguely see the figures of the black-clothed youth and Gong Piao on the battlefield. The fat man clicked his tongue and said, "They really can fight. It wasn't easy for me to lick my face and ask for 18 riders from Mount Tibbing with father-in-law. In addition, there were more than 40 Penglai giants. With Gong Piao overseeing things, they were almost all slaughtered. After this battle, won't my wife not let me climb into bed for a few days?" A roaming cavalry commander rode his horse to Dongzhuo's side and asked in a low voice, "General?" Dongzhuo shook his head and said, "There's no rush." The sturdy commander asked cautiously, "If the stalemate continues, I'm afraid Gong Piao will." Dongzhuo said bluntly, "Just wait until he dies." The commander who had followed Dongzhuo for many years didn't have any abnormalities. He quietly retreated with an expressionless face. At this moment, the sky was like a naughty child splashing ink on a piece of white paper. The more ink there was, the darker the night became. The battle was finally about to end. Dongzhuo waved his hand and the commander quickly rushed over. The fat man laughed and said, "Pass down the order. Our 2,000 riders will go kill that black-clothed youth. Keep an eye on him and don't pay any attention to the rest of the Longxiang army. Whoever takes that youth's head will go to the Southern Imperial Court and become a 4th-rank official with real power, or will be promoted 3 ranks under my Dongzhuo. It's up to him to choose." The commander grinned knowingly and said in a deep voice, "Understood." Dongzhuo raised his green spring spear. He was finally going to personally enter the battlefield. 6,000 soldiers and horses in exchange for 4,000 Longxiang army and the head of Ren Tu's second son. Was it worth it? Dongzhuo sneered and said, "Looks like I'm going to make a killing this time." 50 miles outside the mouth of the gorge, 800 riders galloped wildly. All of them were wearing white horses and white armor. The leader was a handsome and tall rider holding a silver spear. Chapter 6:16. Yellow sand gradually stopped and rose again on the battlefield at the eastern end of the gorge. When a bugle horn sounded, the 2 armies tacitly stopped their slaughter, waiting for the final battle. A baby-faced young dragon elephant cavalry soldier cried out with a wah sound. He raised his head and said to a familiar officer beside him, choking with sobs, "The little flea is dead." The officer whose armor was in tatters grinned with difficulty, not knowing if he should cry or laugh. He didn't know how to console this soldier under his command. This child's ancestors were all Baelyong border herders, his equestrian skills exquisite since he was young. When he entered the army, other newbies still had to throw their warhorses 10 or 8 times a day, yet he could even play with the horse's belly. At the time, the officer was there to personally witness it, cheering loudly. Without another word, he brought him into the Longxiang army, choosing left and right, as if he was choosing a wife. With great difficulty, he finally picked a warhorse that had just been brought into the army from Xianli pasture. It was half-cooked and unremarkable, but only this child took a fancy to it. Later on, it was proven that this horse really was a good horse, its leg strength extremely good, its explosive power also sufficient. Its most valuable point was that when it charged, it was willing to charge side by side with the cavalry. It was because this horse's temperament was jumpy, and when it was familiar with the battlefield, it liked to jump around the child's side, thus gaining the nickname of Little Flea. That child hated that he couldn't even sleep in the stable. If by chance his beloved warhorse contracted a minor illness, getting half its face stabbed by a wooden spear during the drill, it would only be foolishly happy. The child would only be able to cry from heartache, truly even more so than the wife he would marry in the future. In this battle, this child was impatient. Just the number of enemies he saw kill numbered 2, and they were also the last batch of dragon elephant cavalry soldiers who dismounted from horseback. It was unknown how many enemy warhorses had their stomachs cut open by this child's blade, their legs chopped off. The officer knew that this type of cleverness and vigor was a rare talent. Many veteran soldiers might not even have this type of ability. The officer shot a glance at the child's chin. Even his beard was still young and inexperienced. The officer originally wanted to make an exception and become a matchmaker for this child in a year or 2, handing over his niece to him. This could also be considered keeping the goodies within the family. A little child who wasn't even 19 years old, who hadn't even tasted a woman before, dying here today, it truly was a pity. Patting the child's shoulder, he said softly, "When we reach the battlefield, compete with your brothers to see who can kill more. If we die early, we might still be able to catch up to them on the road to hell. If we die later, we kill a few more barbarians." The baby-faced soldier wiped his tears and nodded with a smile. The officer glanced at the youth in black clothed. A group of top-notch Jianghu experts appeared out of nowhere and fought endlessly with their lives on the line. 5 or 6 swordsmen who could actually produce sword aura and 40 or so impenetrable giant men were all cleaned up by the young general like slaughtering chickens and dogs. The enemy's viciousness didn't stop here. First, there was an unkillable old man in green who fought with the young general for half a day. Behind him, there was a young swordsman who was sneakily hiding among the cavalry, pretending to be a grandson for a long time. Unexpectedly, a sword actually pierced through the right side of the young general's chest. After this treacherous sword strike, he disappeared without a trace, completely withdrawing from the battlefield. The officer was a veteran. If he said he was completely unafraid of death, he would be deceiving himself and others. With his official position and experience, he had long passed the hot-blooded age of youth. Moreover, he still had a family to feed. It wasn't as if the officer's head was kicked by a donkey for him to calmly face death for no reason. However, to be able to enter Baelyong's Longxiang army, which was ranked among the best in terms of military strength, the officers of the same rank as the officers of the Baelyong were more valiant and good at fighting compared to many of the other Baelyong generals. They didn't have many cunning guts, and the soldiers they brought out were also relatively simple-minded. To the entire Longxiang army, as long as their superiors dared to charge and die, they would dare to fight. Training an army for 1,000 days to use it for an hour. If they were afraid of death, they wouldn't enter the Longxiang army. The officer also started as a small soldier. Who hadn't heard of those soul-stirring battles from the old soldiers? Chu Lushan's 1,000 light cavalry opened the Shu Road. Concubine Tomb's 16,000 cavalry fought to the death to the last man. Chen Jibao's battle at the Western Wall rampart brought peace to the world. There were too many battles between Xiang and Fan. The officer knew that after the battle at the Calabash Gate, his acquaintances and friends would definitely talk about it. When his name was mentioned, they would all give him a thumbs up. These words would be passed along with the compensation money back to his hometown. It could be considered that he didn't let down those memorial tablets in the ancestral hall that he had knelt to when he was a child. In the future, when his children grew up, they would also be able to straighten their backs and be upright people. The red-armored Dongjua army only had less than 600 soldiers left. What kept them from retreating was the 2,000 mounted soldiers personally led by the general behind them, as well as the Dong clan's military law that would immediately execute anyone who retreated without permission. When they turned their heads to look, they saw a bright red torrent rushing toward them. A large banner was particularly eye-catching. These Dong clan cavalry, who were so exhausted that they could sleep for 3 days as soon as they sat down, felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off their shoulders. But then they felt a little desolate. The invincible Dong clan elite cavalry, 6,000 against 4,000, unexpectedly lost. Around their feet were the corpses of their former comrades, piled up on top of the corpses of the Baelyang people. Many times they fought on foot, stepping into the sticky blood. Every time they raised their feet, it was more strenuous than stepping on the gravel. Many armored soldiers were careless and fell down, and were hacked to death by their opponents. The battle was so fierce that it was hard to tell whether they died under the Baelyang saber or their own Mang saber. Chapter 6:17. Because Baymang rarely had any danger zones to rely on, Baymang's military had always been on the offensive. This caused most of the Baymang army to mistake the Baelyang army for the Baelyang army. The 300,000 cavalrymen were nothing but old news. The military strength of the 8 kingdoms was uneven. How could they be compared to Baymang? Therefore, when the Baelyang army was mentioned, even the most conservative of generals would only think that the 2 armies of Liangmang were equal in strength. The problem for Baymang was not whether they could defeat Baelyang, but when they could go down south. The Dong cavalry was publicly recognized as an elite force on the front line with Tuoba's 180,000 personal troops. The Dong cavalry was especially good at returning spears. In several fierce battles on the eastern front, the Dong cavalry could guarantee that they could retreat for 100 miles without dispersing. This time, when they came to rescue Maolong military town, it was said that the enemy only had 4,000 cavalrymen. Who wouldn't see this as an easy military achievement? A cavalryman of the Dong family heaved a sigh of relief. He adjusted his helmet and lowered his head. He recalled a ballad that had become popular in the army at some point in time. The Dong family's young men rode on horseback with swords and spears, dying on the backs of their horses. Don't cry your heart out for your wives, and your children will be Dong family's men again. The 2 armies had 600 men against 900 men. There were no longer any horses to ride, so they could only fight on foot. The black-clothed youth was stabbed in the chest. The assassin retreated after the successful attack and didn't even retrieve his sword. He didn't manage to pull out that sword during the fierce battle with Gong Pu afterward. The deputy mountain master of Bing Bing Mountain's tendons and veins had long been severed, turning him into a boneless corpse. The youth touched his body and turned into a completely scarlet black tiger. He looked around and pulled out a blade from the abdomen of a dead cavalryman by his feet. The cavalryman was a dragon elephant cavalryman, and the blade was actually the northern cold blade. It could be seen how chaotic this bloody battle was. Su Longxiang chopped off Gong Pu's head and bent down to pick it up. He grabbed it by the hair and raised it high. The 900 Longxiang army immediately roared together, "Fight to the death!" One of the captains saw that many of the cavalrymen were holding Baymang swords and said in a deep voice, "Change your swords." There were no horses, only 900 Baelyang sabers. The 600 Dong Zhuo cavalrymen also changed their sabers at the same time. Dong Zhuo wasn't a general who liked to personally charge and break through enemy lines, but now that the battle had reached this point, he had no choice but to fight. In his heart, he also wanted to personally chop down several dozen dragon elephant cavalry. No matter how much the Southern dynasty despised the fatty's character, they did not dare to deny Dong Zhuo's talent as a commander. General Lu Gue even raised this stubborn young man who talked back from time to time to the height of Gu Jiantang and Chen Jibao. He believed that Dong Zhuo would continue to rise in the war between Baymang and the Liang dynasty, which was destined to be a great war, and become another military pillar of Baymang after Tuoba. With the green spring spear in hand, Dong Zhuo took the lead and charged forward. He stared fixedly at the object in the bag that was gradually becoming an arrow at the end of its flight. Ren Tu's second son, Su Longxiang. Everyone knew that Dong Zhuo was greedy for life and afraid of death, but this did not mean that Dong Zhuo's battle strength was mediocre. This time, for his son-in-law, Mount Tibbing had paid a heavy price. The Peng Lai cauldron-carrying slaves took out more than half, the guest officials took out a third, and even the Baymang's #1 Vajra elder, Gong Pu, was moved out of the mountain. Such a group of death warriors actually couldn't exhaust the black-clothed youth to death. Moreover, there was also a Zhuyan chief assassin helping out. Dong Zhuo had no choice but to accept. If it were any other Finger Xian realm expert, they would have to obediently die more than twice. Dong Zhuo already knew that this was hugging his father-in-law's thigh. He made a scene and begged his father-in-law to personally take action. At this point it was useless to think too much. Dong Zhuo was also not the kind of person who could not let go of things. His bottom line was that he was willing to sacrifice another 1,000 cavalry lives to kill that Su Longxiang. Corpses strewn all over the field would impede the cavalry's attack speed. 600 Dong Zhuo's infantry and cavalry only delayed the 900 Longxiang army. They did not continue to fight. When the 2,000 cavalry approached, they quickly ran to the sides and left the battlefield, clearing a space for them to charge. The 2,000 cavalry rushed over the 900 reefs like a flood. It was similar to the autumn harvest of rice in the Central Plains. This kind of rude and unreasonable waiting for an exhausted enemy to arrive at a leisurely pace achieved a huge result. In one round, they killed nearly 200 men of the Longxiang army, and their side only lost 80 cavalry. Dong Zhuo's green spring spear easily killed and wounded more than 10 extremely tired infantry and cavalry. Of the 80 casualties, half of them were torn apart by the black-clothed youth. Passing through the entire infantry formation, Dong Zhuo turned his horse around and looked at the group of reefs that were riddled with holes but still stood firm. Even with Dong Zhuo's cold-bloodedness, he still had an indescribable feeling. In the future, would his 60,000 men of the Dong family have to face this kind of Bailiang army head-on? Even if he became the only official with power in the imperial court, how many of them would be left? The Dong family army was a direct line of troops that he had spent 10 years to nurture. If one died, there would be one less, and it would be extremely difficult to fill the gap. He still had the confidence to fight against Gu Jiantang on the Eastern Front, but against the Bailiang cavalry, Dong Zhuo did not have much confidence. Dong Zhuo launched the second wave of attacks. Apart from this, he also sent out several hundred cavalry to take on the responsibility of circling around and hunting, not giving the remnants of the Longxiang army any chance to catch their breath. The baby-faced soldier glanced at the familiar lieutenant beside him who had been stabbed by a northern barbarian's spear after killing 2 cavalry. He did not have a sad expression and clenched the Bailiang blade in his hand. The little flea was dead, the old sergeant who always liked to talk dirty was dead, and now the lieutenant was also dead. They were all dead. No matter what, it should be his turn. He grinned. After the second wave of attacks, another 300 men of the 600 Longxiang army had died. When Dong Zhuo was prepared to completely eliminate this group of stubborn Bailiang soldiers, it was actually not them who launched the first attack, but the black-clothed youth who began to run towards him. Was he trying to stall for time with his life? Dong Zhuo narrowed his eyes and clenched his teeth. If nothing unexpected happened, Li Gujuan should have already rushed over to clean up the battlefield. Yellow sand suddenly rose from the mouth of the gourd. Only white horses and white armor could be seen between heaven and earth. Dong Zhuo fiercely spat out a mouthful of saliva, staring and cursing. F***CKU, Huang Songpu Lu Gue Yang Yuanzan, these old bastards 18 generations of ancestors, tricked me into fighting to the death with the great snow dragon cavalry. Dong Zhuo roared without hesitation. Sergeant, get off your horse and give it to the infantry soldiers. Retreat! The general in white armor and silver spear rushed to the battlefield. He glanced at the 2,000 Dong Zhuo soldiers and did not pursue. He walked up to the black-clothed youth with a sword in his chest and said respectfully, "This General Yuan Zuozong greets the general." The youth only tilted his head and asked, "Where is my brother?" Chapter 6:18. While retreating, Dong Zhuo's 2,000 roaming cavalry and 600 infantry pulled apart some distance, their connection clearly loose. After running for 3 li, Dong Zhuo let out a sigh. He pulled on the reins, the green spring spear slowly drawing out a gully in the yellow sand. When he turned around to look, it was quite regretful that the great snow dragon cavalry didn't take advantage of the situation to pursue and attack. Dong Zhuo pursed his lips. He removed his red tasseled helmet and placed it under his armpit, not minding revealing a bitter face to the officers and soldiers under his command. He sighed in despair. A direct subordinate officer who had dismounted to become an infantry followed the cavalry upstream with large strides, arriving under Dong Zhuo's horse. After 3 li, he pretended to be defeated, running like a stray dog. When he stopped, he was actually calm and composed. His mouth full of vulgarities, nothing more than disdaining Bailiang's No. 1 cavalry for not having any guts. The officers and soldiers trained by Fatty Dong were generally all like this. Dong Zhuo placed the green spring spear on the shelf and put on his helmet. "Let's go." That officer who followed behind Dong Zhuo's buttocks asked, "General, are we really going to leave just like that? Are we not going to launch a counterattack?" Dong Zhuo didn't reply to his subordinate's question. Since he didn't say anything, that officer also gave up on the idea of asking. This was precisely the tacit understanding between the Dong family army. Dong Zhuo was not only good at leading a small number of elite cavalry on long-distance raids, he was also extremely good at launching a counterattack. In many intense battles, he could even retreat several dozen li or even several hundred li in the face of a slight disadvantage, and then turn around and fight again, thus establishing victory. One had to bear in mind that the counterattack tactic was a double-edged sword. If used well, there would be miraculous results, but if used poorly, one's cleverness would overturn one's cleverness. If false plays became true, then they would truly be routed 1,000 li, defeated like a landslide. It required a thorough understanding of both the morale of one's own side and the toughness of the enemy's strength. This type of calculation that could easily cost hundreds to thousands of lives was definitely not an armchair strategist. Dong Zhuo muttered to himself, 6,000 against 4,000, fighting to a draw. We've pretty much grasped the foundation of the Longxiang army's strength. Wasu Hongguan did not lose unjustly. The lieutenant chuckled and spoke without restraint. If the elders in the imperial court heard what the general said, they would say that we are shameless again. Dong Zhuo clenched his teeth and slightly lifted his buttocks. The eldest daughter-in-law of the royal family always teased him about the calluses on his buttocks, telling him to ride less. Dong Zhuo was an extremely intelligent person. Although it seemed to be a private conversation between the ladies in the boudoir, what he actually meant was that her husband should not get involved in the battle himself. After all, he was still young and had the status of being a relative of the emperor. He should take less risks to earn military merits. As long as he could endure his temper, he would eventually be able to climb to a high position. However, this time, the reinforcement of Li Gu Maolong was in imminent danger. If he did not personally lead the troops, he would not be at ease. It would be a lie to say that he did not feel heartache after losing 6,000 of his personal soldiers to the Longxiang army. However, Dong Zhuo had always been cold-blooded and heartless in name and in reality. As long as he did not calculate the losses in his heart, he would be too lazy to deliberately pretend to be heartbroken. However, Dong Zhuo's 60,000 elite troops were not the cavalry, but the 12,000 infantrymen. If the latter had lost 6,000, Dong Zhuo would have long gone to the southern court's Huang Songpu and the other great generals to block the door and curse their mothers. After advancing for several li, they saw another 500 cavalry of the Dong family army. This elite troop silently merged into the army. Dong Zhuo had always been known for being crafty and cunning. He was not too fond of staking all his assets on a single throw of life and death business. The reason why he was able to succeed every time he used the return thrust was because every time he retreated, at least 1/6 of the total military strength of the hidden cavalry would be kept at full spirit and vigor, and would be used as the spearhead of the return thrust. In the Battle of Heluku, Dong Zhuo originally thought that since the Longxiang army dared to set up an ambush to attack the reinforcements, the general in charge of troop movement would not move out in full force. Therefore, at first, he did not send the 8,000 cavalry into the battlefield. The facts prove that other than the fact that the Longxiang army did not have a backup plan, Dong Zhuo's other estimations did not have any flaws. If it was not for the appearance of the peerless fierce general who should be the white bear Yuan Zuozong, Dong Zhuo would not only be able to take down the 4,000 Longxiang army, he would also be able to kill Ren Tu's second son in one fell swoop. Of course, Dong Zhuo was not afraid of the great snow dragon cavalry. If they really went all out, together with the 500 cavalry behind them, they would be able to completely defeat Yuan Zuozong. However, if they wanted to kill Yuan Zuozong and Su Longxiang, it would be difficult. Dong Zhuo believed that he was a man who knew how to live his life. Managing the 60,000 Dong family army was like a petty man taking care of a small family. Since he could not kill the only target of this trip, Su Longxiang, killing a few hundred or even a few thousand Bailiang army would not affect the overall situation. Moreover, he would also have to cut off a few gene of flesh from his body. Dong Zhuo felt the pain and was unwilling to do so. The dead fatty had a long face and helplessly said, "After this trip, don't even think about using the excuse of paying a New Year's visit to my father-in-law to steal a goat. That's not all. I'm afraid that I won't be able to touch my little wife's hand for a month." Gong Pu, the guest, and the Penglai cauldron-carrying slave were all killed in the battle. Dong Zhuo did not feel guilty about watching them die for him. However, the layout of the future would be troublesome. After all, his father-in-law commanded Mount Tibbing, which was no different from a military town. He was also famous for his shrewdness and ruthlessness. The captain asked cautiously, "General, we don't seem to be going to Maolong?" Dong Zhuo, who was angry, glared and said, "Are you in a hurry to reincarnate? Don't you see that the king of Baelyong's great snow dragon cavalry has appeared? Only 800 cavalry came. What about the rest? Aren't they going to Maolong? Otherwise, why would the 4,000 Longxiang army appear at the mouth of the calabash and wait for us to enter their crotch?" The captain scratched his head and secretly rolled his eyes. "My sister told you not to take the hot potato, but you didn't listen." Dong Zhuo squeezed out a bright smile and waved his hand. "Yelu Chu Kai, come here, come here." The captain was horrified and slowed down his running speed. The general's call went in one ear and out the other. Dong Zhuo smiled and said, "Brother-in-law." The lieutenant obediently stepped forward, and as expected, he received a solid kick. Only then did the fatty, who had vented his anger, feel refreshed. "Look at how peerless your sister is, and look at you. You're so ugly. When I first met you, I told you that you're definitely not your parents' biological child. Maybe you were picked up." As the captain of Dong Zhuo's brother-in-law, he was a real royal family member. When he heard such disrespectful words, he did not dare to refute. It could be seen that Dong Zhuo's despotic power was flourishing. With a belly full of anger, he had such a rogue brother-in-law. It was really God's dose. Dong Zhuo suddenly restrained his relaxed expression. "If you have something to say it quickly." The captain, who would only be regarded as a rash person, ran near Dong Zhuo's warhorse and said, "It's not strange for the 10,000 Longxiang army to win against the Wazhu army that left the city without permission. However, the Longxiang army was able to appear at the mouth of the gorge without leaving the city. This is enough to show that there's a situation at the gentleman's mansion. Although our Baymang military towns are not as high and steep as the towns controlled by the Central Plains, the Dragon Elephant cavalry could not take down the gentleman's mansion. Using a cavalry that can't keep up with siege weapons to attack the city is really comical. This only shows that the Baelyong's infiltration of the Baymang border army is far beyond the Southern Dynasty's imagination. Perhaps Hong Guan was hot-headed and went out of the city to resist the enemy because there were spies causing mischief." Dong Zhuo didn't nod or shake his head. He continued to ask, "Then tell me. Look at the Longxiang army penetrating deep into the city alone. There were only 400 soldiers left at the mouth of the gorge. Adding on the injuries from before, there were less than 2,000 of the 10,000 Baelyong elites left. What was the point of paying such a high price?" The captain, who was often teased by Dong Zhuo as a golden branch and jade leaf, thought for a moment and said, "The Wazhu gentleman's mansion is near the 4 towns of Gugu, Maolong, and Long. In the end, it is a military town that is easy to defend and easy to attack. Apart from the military strength, it doesn't have much value. Unless the Baelyong army is stupid, they would not leave soldiers to defend it and wait for the old generals of the southern dynasties to seek revenge. To tell the truth, I can't figure out what was fought in this battle. Was the king of Baelyong muddle-headed? Or was he in a hurry to send his second son to the Baelyong army as a general?" Chapter 619. Dong Zhuo kicked him, but his brother-in-law dodged quickly. The fat man laughed angrily and said, "After talking for so long, you still haven't gotten to the point. Your sister is right. You've been reading military books to death. You don't know how to explore things other than military books." The captain was used to his brother-in-law's beating and scolding as a sign of affection. He smiled shamelessly and said, "General is wise and powerful. Please help me to explain it clearly." Dong Zhuo smiled casually. At first, all the military towns near the border of northern Liang were quite conceited in terms of combat ability. They thought that they could fight the cavalry of northern Liang in a one-on-one battle openly without being at a disadvantage. Not only did the generals such as Hong Guan think so, but the survivors of the Central Plateaus, the old and the young, also wanted to go back home to pay homage to their ancestors, or to miss the rich and comfortable environment in the south. Therefore, they secretly added fuel to the fire. When people gather firewood, the fire will burn brightly. First, the southern army looked down on the Baelyong army. Then, the entire southern imperial court became impetuous. It was inevitable that it affected the northern imperial court and Her Majesty's mentality. More or less, Her Majesty hurriedly attacked Baelyong because she felt that she could conquer Baelyong in one fell swoop. The captain hesitated for a moment and said, "Then let's fight. Since the Baelyong army can cause chaos in Longyao province with only the Longxiang army, we can obviously fight to the death. Our southern imperial court is so arrogant. If we really fight, we will definitely be at a disadvantage. Why did the Baelyong send troops at this time? Could it be that I was right? Is the king of Baelyong really muddle-headed? Now that this battle has started, Longyao province is almost powerless to fight back. The Empress is so proud of the Sui-Wu fortress network that she created for the courier route has been smashed into a sieve. In the end, when the battle really started, we realized that we have encountered the ancestor of the courier route system, the king of Baelyong. There is no way we can play. In this way, our northern Mang will be even more cautious in the way we deploy our troops. If we spend a few more years to truly calm our hearts and not play any fancy tricks, instead earnestly building practical beacon and fire relay routes, wouldn't the Northern Liang army have no hope of advancing north and withdraw south in peace? Dongjua slowly spat out 2 words. Time. The lieutenant was stunned for a moment and asked in confusion, "What?" Dongjua stroked the body of the green spring spear on the side of the saddle and said softly, "Su Shao, this old and mighty king of Baelyong Mountain is waiting for the Baelyong heir apparent to have enough strength to pass away and take over the Baelyong army. However, in order to ensure that the young heir would not be at a disadvantage in the battle with Chen Jibao, Su Shao would have to exert himself for nothing. No matter what he did, it would be wrong. Secondly, Chen Jibao has a great innate advantage accumulated in the spring and autumn war. Thus, Su Shao has to slowly freeze Chen Jibao in these few years to buy time for his eldest son. If Bei Mang went south too quickly, even if he hurriedly helped the heir onto the throne, the Baelyong army would still lean toward Chen Jibao. In the end, probably only the great snow dragon riders, Long Xiang, and Wei Xiong would remain under the Su banner. Speaking of which, in order to beat Bei Mang, using his second son to lead the Longxiang army was the king of Baelyong's only choice. Not only could he pave the way for his 2 sons, he could also justify himself on the mountain behind Chen Jibao. This time, he sent troops to Bei Mang and didn't use your direct subordinates to fill the hole. In the end, Su Zhao's table manners are very good. There is no reason for the Baelyong army to criticize him. Dongjua muttered to himself, "If it were me, I would do the same. Even if the entire Longxiang army was wiped out, I wouldn't feel any heartache. Being a general and being a commander, feeling heartache is not the same. Besides, the Longxiang army still has 2,000 soldiers left. After the war, when they are reorganized, they can casually pull out 8,000 strong cavalry. The strength of the Longxiang army won't be reduced by too much. Even if I use my butt to step on it, I know that these 8,000 soldiers are definitely some or a few of the people who will remain neutral when the king of Baelyong changes. They are the old elite soldiers in their hands. In this way, it is equivalent to the new king of Baelyong and Chen Jibao secretly changing sides. This kind of style is an open scheme that can't be read in military books." The lieutenant was stunned and muttered, "That butcher has planned so far ahead." Dongjua said with a smile, "Otherwise, do you think that Baelyong and Bei Mang and Liyang are the 3 pillars of the tripartite balance? I heard that the Tide Hark Pavilion in Baelyong Palace has a strategist called Li Yishan. Previously, he was underestimated by the important people of the 2 dynasties as only knowing how to govern. They said that in terms of leading troops and planning, he cannot even compare to Zhao Chongling, the military strategist who died many years ago. In my view, this is all Li Yishan's concealment. This scholar is both strange and useful. He is someone worthy of my, Dongjua's, respect." Most of the credit for the 300,000 cavalry of the Baelyong army being able to maintain their strength for more than a decade and remain strong in a corner of the land is due to Li Yishan. If he dies, I am very curious who has the qualifications and ability to strategize for the new king of Baelyong. The lieutenant snickered and said, "Can't we have Zhu Li assassinate this person?" Dongjua slapped the Bei Mang scabbard hard on his brother-in-law's helmet. "I just told you the importance of open schemes, and you are thinking of such crooked ideas. You are really a stone in the latrine. I can't teach you." The lieutenant said in grievance, "General, aren't you famous in Bei Mang for your cunning?" For the first time, Dongjua did not say much. He mocked himself inside. "I am doing what I can." The lieutenant could not stand his brother-in-law's silence and asked curiously, "General, do you think that Butcher's second son will die after being stabbed in the heart?" That person has the title of Heart Stealer in Zhu Li. Fatty Dong thought of the sword of the chief assassin of Zhu Li and said regretfully, the style of that sword is terrible, but it is not enough to kill Su Longxiang. On the battlefield at the mouth of the gourd, White Bear Yuan Zuozong looked at the sword in Su Longxiang's chest and was furious. He was one of the top 3 generals in the army of the Liang dynasty. He knew the fierceness of this sword and could not pull it out. The sword was stabbed in the heart at first, but because of Su Longxiang's qi, it slid to the left side of his chest and stabbed in. Not only did the tip of the sword penetrate his chest, but when the sword left his hand, it was like a rootless willow branch that could be casually used as a shade. The sword aura grew luxuriantly in the black-clothed youth's body and continued to flourish. Even with Su Longxiang's physique, the blood in his chest only showed signs of stopping. Although Yuan Zuozong was furious, he was good at maintaining his composure. He gently gritted his teeth and remembered this assassin, the chief assassin of Zhu Li, who was known as the Heart Stealer. Su Longxiang asked the second question, "Do I have to go north to find my brother?" Yuan Zuozong felt sad and shook his head with a smile. My foster father said he could go home when he reached the mouth of the gourd. His Royal Highness will soon return to Bailiang. Su Longxiang said, "Then I'll wait here." Yuan Zuozong said, "No need. My foster father told me that His Highness would not pass by here." Yuan Zuozong thought he could not persuade the young prince who was born with closed apertures. He did not expect that the young man in black only thought for a moment and nodded. Yuan Zuozong looked at the bloody battlefield and for the first time looked forward to the return of the eldest son of the general. Only then did he remember that Su Fengnian had actually gone out to travel 3 times. On the post-house road in Bailiang, willows rustled. A scholar was holding a little girl's hand. They had no horse to ride on, let alone hire a carriage. However, they were not in a hurry. The willows on the post-house road were thick and strong. They could withstand the sun while walking in the shade of the trees. They depended on each other for survival. They were happy for more than a year. They were born with a hard life and were not afraid of hardship. "Brother Chen, are we going to see young Master Su?" "Not necessarily. I have to travel all over Bailiang to know if I miss him or not. Of course, I don't know if he will see me or not. After all, he is the hereditary crown prince of Bailiang. He is not an ordinary person. Young Master Su is a good man. He helped me pick up money in the wishing pond. Later, he gave us a watermelon and stir-fried it with its skin. Brother Chen, didn't you say it was delicious? Good people can do bad things and bad people can do good things. It's hard to say." The little girl didn't understand either. She just smiled and said, "Oh." The scholar saw that no one was around. He secretly broke off a long willow branch and weaved it into a garland to put on the little girl's head. He once said that he would die as a civil official. He once gave General Su Gong the 6 matters of submission. He once shocked the world in Gangnam-do Baogua Temple's Tsushui Tan Wang Ba. This was the poor scholar Chen Liangxi, who had taken the little beggar to travel the north and south of the river. Back then, when Zhao Chongling saw the butcher Su Xiao for the first time, he took 600 servant girls and family servants with him. Een Talent Li Yishan was alone, and he was also in dire straits. Chapter 620. The second chapter is around 12 o'clock. There is a third chapter before dawn. More than 50 camels formed a line and moved forward with difficulty on the Gobi Desert. The members of the caravan wore silk masks and most of them were leading the camels. Only a slender figure was riding on a young camel. The person leading the camel was an old but still burly man. His attire was simple and refreshing. He was obviously the leader of the caravan. A large water sack made of lambskin was hanging on his waist. The person riding on the delicate soft saddle between the 2 camels always had some kind of question. Most of them were bold and unrestrained. Even the experienced old man was caught off guard and did not know how to answer. Along the way, they actually encountered 2 mirages that were hard to come by in a lifetime. Both mirages were rare scenes of an isolated island on the sea. Perhaps only the legendary hovering mountain of the Taoist sect could be comparable. The person riding the camel asked about the origin and authenticity of the mirages. The old man who cared about his reputation could only stammer. He was pestered until there was no way out. He had no choice but to change the topic and said some anecdotes of wild fox spirits that he heard. The person riding the camel said softly, "Grandpa Hong, will we reach the big city in the north after crossing the Gobi Desert?" The old man smiled and said, "Miss, there is still a way to go in this Gobi desert. Remember the flaming mountain last time? It looked close, but it took us half a day to walk." The ancient said that a mountain would run a horse to death. The person on the camelback was actually a woman. She reached out and removed some of the silk scarves that blocked the yellow sand from entering her mouth. A pair of watery eyes that made people feel refreshed was revealed. She asked curiously, "Grandpa Hong, we don't have much water. Why did you give that scholar a sack of water? He said that he would give you money, but you didn't accept it." The sturdy old man with the surname Hong said softly, "When you're outside, it's always a good thing to be able to form good karma, no matter how big or small. Back then, when I was in trouble in the desert, it was Mrs. Grandfather who helped me. Otherwise, Hong Bai would be a skeleton under the yellow sand today. Besides, we don't have many water sacks with us. If we are really in trouble, we can still kill the camel to get water. At most, we will have one less camel's goods. Money is dead after all. It can't be compared to living people." The woman nodded and smiled. The old man praised sincerely, "Miss has a bodhisattva's heart since young. Good people will be rewarded. In the future, she will definitely be able to find a good match for her." This time the woman who had snuck into the camel caravan asked again, "Grandpa Hong, I've read those novels about scholars and beauties that were printed in Jiangnan. Young ladies from noble families all fall in love with down-and-out scholars at first sight. I've never seen any woman go looking for a husband of equal social status. Why is that?" The old man felt a headache coming on. After holding it in for a long time, he said, "Young miss, you see, most of those scholars will also pass the imperial examination, return home in glory, and then grow old together with women. Young miss, when you read this kind of forbidden book, you can't only see the absurdity of the noble young ladies. Those young ladies have good taste. Tens of thousands of scholars go to the capital to take the imperial examination, like carps jumping over the dragon's gate, but only a few can jump over the dragon's gate, yet they have taken a fancy to them. The young miss in this manual has even more sinister taste than us businessmen who have been doing business for half of our lives. If the young miss unfortunately makes an error in judgment and gets on the wrong sedan chair to marry the wrong man, the author won't be happy to write the book." The young woman suddenly understood. She smiled with some shame and said, "In the past, when I stole forbidden books from my brothers, I only cared about watching them being intimate under the moonlight. I blushed and then forgot about it. I really didn't understand this principle. Fortunately, Grandpa Hong explained it clearly." The old man laughed and said, "If a scholar and a beautiful woman can't reunite, then what kind of scholar and beautiful woman are they? Young miss, when you get married in the future, you have to live well. If you are bullied, Grandpa Hong will fight to be kicked out of the house by the old master to teach him a lesson." She shook her head and said, "I don't want to get married. Father, mother, and brother treat me so well, that's enough. If in the future my husband has 3 wives and 4 concubines and indulges in debauchery, I will cry to death." Between Liangmang, other than the tea-horse road on the surface, there were also a few silk roads under the surface. Under the guise of all kinds of trade, most of the silk roads were bought by border merchants from Gangnam-do of the Liang dynasty, and the old western Shu to sell to the nobles of the Beimang imperial court. The empress, who ruled the country strictly, was still somewhat humane and turned a blind eye to it. She did not ban those few silk roads. As long as there was a connection, it was a business with little capital and huge profits. However, it was a long journey of thousands of miles, and the money earned was hard-earned money. In the early days, many of the Silk Road merchants had died on the road. It was only in these years that Liang and Beimang were peaceful and the war stopped that the Silk Road ushered in its heyday. Because most of the silk was carried by camels, Gangnam-do had a lot of names like Camel Bridge and White Camel Bridge. This camel caravan belonged to a branch of the Tantai family of the Southern Dynasty. Tantai was a big surname, and a big family naturally had the spirit of a big family. However, to support the style, one had to rely on all kinds of ways to make money. The eldest branch of the Tantai family had always considered themselves as a scholarly family. A gentleman would stay away from the kitchen, and their 2 sleeves were very clean. Not to mention dealing with prostitution, the dirty and tiring work fell on the branch of the Tantai family. The Tantai family had many branches and leaves, and the old master had many children and grandchildren. He might not even remember half of their names and faces. The branch that Hong Bai belonged to was just a small branch. Otherwise, the young lady would not have dared to sneak into the camel caravan. This spoiled girl was called Tantai Changle. She yearned for the old western shoe of the Tantai family. Coincidentally, the caravan had thousands of mu of shu mulberry trees in the old western shu. When she entered Shu, it was the beautiful scenery of Sangro and the surrounding suburbs. She almost did not want to go home. After passing the border of Liangmang and going north along the Silk Road, it became more and more desolate and difficult to travel. Fortunately, she could bear the hardship and always found joy in the hardship, which made Hong Bai's burden much less. This Miss Tantai, who grew up in the Vermilion Gate building, always had inexplicable questions. This time, Hong Bai almost emptied his stomach of ink when he went south to the old Shu and north to the palace. In less than half a day, he would pass through the Gobi Desert and reach the edge of the imperial tent. When he returned home, the young lady probably would not have the time to ask why. At this time, Hong Bai was telling her about the origin of the Silk Road to Bailiang. He talked about the official robes of the Liang dynasty, and then the robes of the titled madams. When he talked about this, the old man who had experienced many hardships also had a deep feeling. The official robes of the southern dynasty evolved from the Central Plains during the spring and autumn period. For example, the madam's robes at the celebration court meeting were the fourth rank of the secondary class. It was true that a woman's status depended on her husband. Of course, there were also many women who obtained wealth because of their sons, especially those concubines in the imperial palace during the spring and autumn period. She tilted her head and asked, "But my father is a military general. Why is my mother's robe a bird's robe?" Hong Bai smiled and said, "Miss, this is particular. A woman's elegance is beautiful. She worships literature and does not worship martial arts. However, there really is a woman's official robe in the world. Perhaps it has never been seen before and will never be seen again." She opened her eyes wide and asked, "Whose is it?" Hong Bai led the camel and walked on the scorching saline alkali Gobi Desert. He smiled and said, "The king of Bailiang's imperial concubine's robe is a first-rank lion's robe. It is rumored that it is extremely gorgeous and can be said to be flawless. Even if it is hung together with the king of Bailiang's official robe, it does not lose the least bit of elegance." Chapter 621. Tantai Changle lived in the boudoir for a long time. In the end, she only liked women who were picturesque. She never asked about the change of dynasties. As for the concubines of the king of Bailiang, she only heard that they died early and did not enjoy a few years of happiness. Hong Bai, on the other hand, was born in the marketplace and had traveled extensively. He had also encountered several opportunities that made ordinary people envious. When he was in the prime of his life, he had also made quite a name for himself in the Jianghu of the Central Plains. As for why he was wrapped up in the flood of scholars rushing north and why he was sheltered under someone else's roof in Tantai, it was probably some bitter story that could not be joked about. After he became docile, he stopped playing with swords and spears. Instead, he picked up the books that he hated when he was young and cultivated his mind. When the old man mentioned this princess, he spontaneously felt respect for her. He said softly, "This princess was the only female sword immortal in 300 years. She asked naturally, "What is a sword immortal? Can one step on a sword and fly around?" Hong Bai, who had not entered the second rank, did not know the profoundness of the land immortal realm. His straightforward personality did not allow the old man to make up nonsense. He could only say embarrassedly, "Probably." She turned her head and covered her mouth to laugh. She was being kind and did not expose him. Hong Bai was a clever person. He blushed. Tantai Changle stopped smiling and asked, "Does our southern dynasty have any sword immortals?" Hong Bai shook his head and said, "I heard that there are more in the Liang dynasty. In the path of the sword, I have to admit that the swordsmen of the Central Plains have been more outstanding since ancient times. In the past, there was Li Chun Gang, the outstanding Jianghu talent of my generation. Now, there is the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. I think that in the future, there will be people from Liang. Beimang will not be the champion of the sword." The woman said with a fascinated expression, "Sword immortals, I really want to see them with my own eyes." Hong Bai could not refute her openly. He only laughed softly and said, "One sword can easily break a river or shake a mountain and destroy a city. It is better for us ordinary people not to see them." A strange phenomenon suddenly appeared between heaven and earth. It was as if the temperamental god had been enraged and had suddenly become irritable. Those who had to beg for food from God, such as tenant farmers or shepherds, were most afraid of this. Tantai Changle didn't know the severity of the situation, But Hong Bai's face was already pale and dispirited. The old merchants in the caravan who walked the Silk Road all year round were the same. Tan Tai Changle looked up and saw that the line between heaven and earth was like black smoke, covering the sky and the sun. At noon, the sky gradually darkened like dusk. Walking in the thousands of miles of yellow sand, one was afraid of land dragons and water, and another was afraid of this kind of sandstorm. The former was relatively rare, while the latter usually occurred in spring. Now that summer had turned to autumn, how could such a terrible disaster happen for no reason? The key was that the sandstorm this time was particularly fierce. Looking at the terrifying momentum of the wind and sand in the distance, Hong Bai did not expect to encounter such a scale of sandstorm in the Gobi Desert. He made a prompt decision. The caravan had nowhere to retreat in the Gobi Desert, so he ordered the caravan to start killing the camels, skinning them and removing the internal organs. A camel skeleton was freed for the Tan Tai caravan to enter. More than 50 camels gathered in a pile and covered the gaps with camel skin. Perhaps they could escape this disaster. Usually they could hide near the kneeling camels in a small sandstorm, but today, they did not dare to be careless in this huge sandstorm. Fortunately, the camel skeletons were large enough to squeeze 2 people. As for whether they could escape the sandstorm or not, it was up to fate. Hearing that they had to kill the camel to avoid the wind, the woman could not bear to part with the white camel she was riding. Her eyes were red from crying, and she was unwilling to take out her knife to kill and skin the camel. Hong Bai and the nimble members of the caravan did not care about the valuable goods. They quickly killed the camels that depended on each other and hurriedly removed the internal organs and stomach pouches. The sandstorm was close at hand. When they looked up, they could already see a black sand column as tall as a city wall coming from the northwest. It rolled up countless sand and stones, and the whistling sound was like thunder. Looking back, he saw that the mist was still looking at the white camel. The old man was so anxious that his eyes turned red. He did not care whether the mist would hold a grudge against him or not. He raised his knife and wanted to kill the camel for her. Just as the old man said, the goods carried by the caravan were valuable, but human lives were even more valuable. The caravan members were all elites of the Tan Tai silk trade. If anyone died, it would be a loss that the family could not make up for in a short time. Not to mention, Tan Tai Changle was the old master's most doted granddaughter. Even the old master liked her. If she died in this sandstorm, Hong Bai would not have the face to go back alive. Hong Bai shouted loudly, "Miss, you can't delay any longer." Her face was full of grievances. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. She looked very pitiful. Hong Bai sighed in his heart. He raised his knife and walked towards the most beautiful white camel in the caravan. Tan Tai Changle turned her head. Although she could not bear it, she was not so insensible as to stop him. When she turned her head, she suddenly widened her bright eyes. She saw a scholar in a black robe with white undershirt floating towards her. She thought she was seeing things and blinked hard. In the blink of an eye, he brushed past her and came to Hong Bai's side. He pressed on the old man's arm. Hong Bai looked up with a blank face. The scholar who had borrowed a bag of water from the caravan shook his head, as if indicating that Hong Bai did not need to use the knife. When Hong Bai was hesitating, the scholar who had traveled for many years did not know what was good for him and continued to move forward. He floated for 5 or 6 feet in a flash. Tan Tai Changle was stunned. Wasn't he the scholar who did not have the strength to truss up a chicken? When she saw him pay for the water, she laughed in her heart that he did not know the dangers of traveling and dared to travel alone in the desert. At that time, she had a woman's thoughts that no one knew about. She only thought that such a handsome scholar like him should stay in a dilapidated ancient temple in the wilderness to study at night. Perhaps there would even be a fox immortal who would recommend herself to sleep with him. Fortunately, her face was covered with a silk scarf at that time, so no one saw her cheeks blushing. The scholar moved forward alone. He was only about 3 miles away from the black wall. A sword was unsheathed from the book chest. A red robe appeared out of nowhere and appeared next to the scholar. It was Su Fengmian. Other than the spring and autumn sword floating in the air half a mile away, the scholar also took out 12 flying swords, which spun rapidly around him and the red-robed otherworldly item. A large circular sword formation appeared out of thin air. The sword formation was made of black silk. The 12 flying swords were forged from time to time. Naturally, half of them were Yin swords. However, the Morning Dew golden thread and the other swords were Yang swords. If he wanted to form the formation as he wished, he had to borrow the otherworldly item's strength. The merchant only heard one word from the scholar. It was like a Taoist immortal speaking the truth, like a Buddhist chanting, "Rise!" Wherever the torrent reached, it was blocked by the sword formation. Only the front part of the sword formation was forced to rise. It was as if there was a black rainbow hanging in the air above everyone's head. It drew an arc in the air and then fell a few miles behind everyone. The Tantai camel caravan was completely in the middle of this strange phenomenon. Hong Bai was shocked beyond words. He could actually see with his own eyes that a swordsman could use human strength to fight against the heavens. After the time it takes to burn a stick of incense, the black rainbow and the sand moved back together. The place where everyone was at returned to normal. The scholar carrying the book was nowhere to be seen. The merchant caravan who had survived the disaster looked at each other in dismay. The woman looked forward in a daze. In Hong Bai's eyes, he vaguely remembered that in the Jianghu 50 years ago, there were also many women who looked at the sword-wielding green robe in a daze. When the sword was unsheathed, there was no injustice in the world. Hong Bai sighed softly. He's really like Li Chun Gang. Chapter 622. 2 chapters are already 8,000 words. The next chapter is before 4 a.m. At dusk, Su Fengnian finally arrived at the source of the weak water at the border of Aquaria State. It was a verdant oasis, like a green pearl embedded in a yellow sand disk. It was a delightful sight. Su Fengnian washed his face by the green river at the edge of the oasis. The otherworldly item in the red robe was playing in the water like a koi. Before leaving Bailiang, he was informed that this place was heavily guarded. Not only was there a troop of 600 imperial cavalry stationed here, there were also many catchers and butterfly catchers under Shadow Prime Minister Li Mibi. They interweaved into a large spider web, led by a top assassin swordsman. They were not only to protect the old man, but also to monitor him closely. Whether it was the route he took to enjoy the scenery or the dishes he ate, everything had to be reported to his master Li Mibi. In addition to the old man's own forces, the two sides confronted each other and cooperated to resist the endless revenge assassination. However, in Su Fengnian's opinion, it was inconsistent with the information he received. The hidden forces were sparse, and the troop of 600 men stationed 10 miles away had been reduced to only 200. Su Fengnian washed his face with cold water and immediately felt relieved. No matter how stubborn the old man was in the eyes of Bei Mang, he had completely given up for 5 or 6 years and lived behind the scenes. His reputation was naturally not as feared as before. The situation in Bei Mang and Liang was the same. At first, it was mostly the south facing the north. If it was said that the king of the southern court, Huang Songpu, had made a good start as a general in the southern court, there was actually someone who had occupied a high position in the northern court as a remnant of the spring and autumn period. He could be said to be second only to one and above all. Back then, every time the empress went on a hunt and had a discussion with the officials, only this person could make the unruly nobles willingly submit to her. It could be said that it was this old man's credit that Bei Mang was able to smoothly implement the scholarly rule. The purpose of Su Fengnian's trip was to meet this old man who was regarded as the pillar of Bei Mang by the empress. Who would believe that the crown prince of Bei Mang, who was destined to be irreconcilable with the Bailiang, would walk thousands of miles just to throw himself into a trap? Su Fengnian chose this secluded spot near the water, and was not in a hurry to enter the interior of the oasis. It was obvious that this was a Cheeman Dun Jia formation. If he stepped in carelessly, he might be arrested as an assassin. Su Fengnian waited until dusk, but the otherworldly item in the red robe was still indifferent, as if it had nothing to worry about. Su Fengnian held his breath like an old monk in meditation. He remembered the camel-riding woman he met in the Gobi Desert half a year ago. He did not need to look at her face to know that she was a dragon lady. Otherwise, with Su Fengnian's current cultivation, he would not have shown himself to borrow water. As for the help he gave later, he did not think too much about it. It was nothing more than the kindness of the water, and he would repay it with a gushing spring. According to ancient books, every time this kind of mirage woman entered the ocean or the desert, a mirage would appear. The only difference was that she was a sea serpent or a sand serpent. The sea serpent belonged to the flood dragon, and its breath could form a building. It was different from Gong Gong Dan's innate divine strength, and it was also different from Phoenix concubine Xiang, who was the mother of the world. Since ancient times, the Mirage Woman had been regarded as the key to finding the immortal mountain by the emperors who were seeking immortality. However, this illusion could not appear for no reason. After all, it had to have something to rely on. In previous dynasties, when the emperor sent necromancers out to sea to find the immortal mountain, there must be a dragon lady in the team. However, it was not known whether the dragon lady would become the key to becoming the emperor in the future. Su Fengnian was indifferent to it. It was not something that he, a prince whose position was in danger, could decide. How many people in the world could be as straightforward as the old man in the sheepskin fur coat when he was young? Most of the martial artists in Jianghu believed in the principle of observing more and doing less after suffering losses. One was Su Xiao, who was famous in Jianghu, and the other was the Empress of Beimang, who was his lackey. They easily made all the Jianghu people in the two Jianghu helpless. Su Fengnian suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the small path by the water. At the end of the path, there was an old man and a young boy coming together. The young boy had rosy lips and white teeth. He came riding a bamboo horse, looking naive and cute. He used a bamboo pole as his hip to dismount the horse and called out softly. The child was wearing a wide-sleeved Taoist robe. He looked natural, making people forget the vulgarity when they saw him. The old man beside the child had white hair and a beard. He was tall and had a scholar's head and a green robe. He had a natural air of elegance. The old man held the young boy's bamboo horse in one hand and two scriptures in the other. When he saw Su Fengnian, who did not hide his whereabouts, he did not seem surprised. He let go of the young boy's hand and waved at Su Fengnian with a smile as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for a long time. Su Fengnian did not hide because he guessed the old man's identity. The former most powerful minister in Beimang's royal court, Su Huainan, was born in Liaodong. After careful consideration, he was actually a distant relative who was one generation older than Su Xiao. However, this kind of relationship was so distant that it could be ignored. Su Huainan had already arrived in Beimang before the scholars fled to the north. He became the chief strategist and meritorious official of the Murong clan's empress who usurped the throne. He was very knowledgeable and devoted all his life's learning to the Beimang court. When Li Yong first settled down, it attacked Beimang with great momentum. It was he who urged the empress, who had yet to sit firmly on the dragon throne, to go south and personally lead the troops. That was how the world was divided into the north and the south today. Li Yong's second expedition to the north was also because he, who had already retired from his post, came out of his thatched cottage and formulated a strategy that allowed the upstart Tuoba to defeat Li Yong's three fronts. He had been living in seclusion by the Ruoshui all these years. Nominally, he was a double-faced spy who sold military intelligence to both his left and right hands, which angered the empress. He had no choice but to resign from his post and leave the royal court. In reality, he was fully deserving of his title as a meritorious elder. Su Huainan's attitude towards the Murong clan differed greatly from the empress's and was disheartened. The so-called spy case that shocked the imperial court was just a way for both sides to take a step back. Looking at this old man who had once climbed to the top step by step and then slowly walked down the stairs, Su Fengnian couldn't help but have mixed feelings. The person in front of him was a powerful official who could be compared with Su Xiao in terms of fame and achievements. Su Fengnian respectfully bowed with his hands folded in front. The old man, who was in high spirits, walked closer and helped the Su family's descendant who had risked his life to stand up. After scrutinizing him for a while, he smiled with gratification and said, "This old man never thought that it would be you who would come to visit me. I even thought that it might be Su Xiao who came to visit me personally. This is really a big surprise. You're indeed a member of the Su family. I've said it a long time ago, souls without courage and insight wouldn't dare to enter the womb of the Su family's daughter-in-law." Chapter 623. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. Su Huainan touched the head of the young boy beside him and looked at the rippling river. He said softly, "Don't worry, there is a big movement at the border of Liangmang. I took away a very important Zhu Wang swordsman because I guessed that you would come, so I took the opportunity to transfer away most of the imperial cavalry. This place looks the most dangerous, but it is also the safest." During the Qingming festival, he killed Tao Chenji in the city of Lingqing. Later on, he had a fight with Tuoba Chun's son, making that little general who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth suffer in silence. Along the way, he conveniently killed the heart-sucking devil Xieling. In the city of Dunhuang, he attracted Deng Tea to draw his sword. It seems that he even had a grudge with the princess tomb on the other side of the Yellow River. "Young man, you have really opened this old man's eyes. At that time, I said that as long as you can reach Ruoshui alive, I will meet you no matter what. Come, let's sit down and talk." Su Huainan and Su Fengnian sat on the grass beside the river. The naive child suddenly became angry. He lifted his bamboo horse and was about to chop it into the water. The strong qi made Su Fengnian suffocate for a moment. The red-robed otherworldly item jumped out of the water and also looked like it was about to overturn the river and the sea. Fortunately, Su Huainan held onto the green bamboo pole and shook his head. Only then did the child withdraw his qi and return to his naive and innocent expression. Seeing Su Fengnian's strange expression, the old man revealed some heavenly secrets. However, he did not reveal too much and smiled warmly. I can't tell if it is the supreme supernatural power of Taoism's I Chi San Qing or the obscure method of severing 3 corpses on 10 continents. However, the one beside me must be a poor child. In these few years, the cottage has been deserted. The smart people who know how to cultivate in the public way like the cold stove have gradually lost their temper. Fortunately, I have this child to accompany me, so I don't feel old and boring. To the orthodox Taoism, the golden elixir of dragon and tiger had always been regarded as the only right way to achieve immortality. Talisman and external elixir were unorthodox, not to mention severing 3 corpses, a heretical method that was not recorded in any ancient books. Furthermore, Su Fengnian was not in the mood to get to the bottom of this small matter. It was only a little Taoist child, yet he was able to make the otherworldly item full of yin qi feel as if it was facing a great enemy. Wasn't Beimang too full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers? If it was a year ago, I would have followed the agreement and helped Su Xiao plan the Mang annexation for Bailiang. After all, I can't be said to be loyal to the imperial court, nor do I have the hobby of being a minister under a woman's skirt. The reason why I became a dog who left his hometown and sold his country, and worked hard for the empress, was only because I held a grudge against the spring and autumn period and Liang. Since that was the case, I was happy to see Liang Mang make waves. This is more interesting than replaying a chess game. Of course, I am the same as Su Xiao, famous for being a terrible chess player. However, the Taiping decree of the Chess and Sword Music School is a genuine national player both on and off the chessboard. He traveled around Liang for more than 10 years and figured out the situation. This time, when he returned to the palace, he found the right remedy for the problem and played a big game. Black and white determined the universe, including Beimang, Liang, and Bailiang. My position as strategist was naturally replaced by this new imperial preceptor. All these years, I waited for the right price to sell and became a big joke. Su Fengnian, since the imperial court no longer has a place for me to use, what can I do even if I thicken my face and come back? Su Fengnian was silent. Su Huainan, who had a self-deprecating tone, didn't look at the young heir who had traveled over mountains and rivers to come here. Are you very disappointed? Su Fengnian nodded and said, if I say I'm not disappointed, I don't believe it myself. Su Huainan really did not beat around the bush. He slowly said, when I was born, my family was naturally filled with riches and honor. After I die, my entire family is destined to be executed in less than 10 years. Half of it is because I deliberately didn't restrain my clansmen and allowed them to break the law and commit crimes. When I was the Prime Minister of the Northern Courtyard, I deliberately had bad relations with the Yelu and Murong families for a long time. The other half is because the Empress is a woman, and it is natural for women to hold grudges. Before she dies, she is fated to settle old debts with me. Even if she does not make things difficult for me, the next emperor of Beimang will make an example of my descendants. I think I have done right by my clansmen. For more than 30 years, I was like the sun in the sky, a glory and wealth that ordinary people cannot enjoy in several lifetimes. Only one person cannot die, or rather, cannot die so early. This is my compensation to Su Xiao for breaking my promise. Su Fengnian looked up in puzzlement. Su Huainan laughed softly and said, back then, Su Xiao had Zhao Chongling and Li Yishan as his left and right arms. I am not an immortal and cannot give to the two of them. I can only give to you, the future king of Bailiang, one of them. If you trust him, then use him without worry. He was originally going to die of exhaustion before 40. The old man pointed at his head. I have taught this unremarkable concubine's grandson all the schemes and plots I have learned from reading history. Without needing Su Fengnian to ask, the old man smiled and said, he is already on his way to Bailiang. You will meet when you should. Su Fengnian was about to stand and give his thanks when the old man waved his hand and stopped him. I owe you and your father. This old man was able to rise up in Beimang without Su Zhao's help. Su Huainan suddenly smiled and said, I remember when I left home in my youth, my original intention was to become a Confucian scholar. After traveling tens of thousands of miles, I would read tens of thousands of books. It would be good if I could be a commentator. Who would have thought that I would reach this step today? Su Fengnian was speechless. Su Huainan patted Su Fengnian's shoulder and said amiably, "In the future, the world will be decided by you youngsters." After sighing, the old man asked, "I heard that you have a good grasp of the sword and the blade. Do you have a Baoyang blade? I would like to take a look." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "It's not good to bring a Baoyang blade to Beimang. I only have a spring thunder dagger." The old man slapped his forehead and said with a smile, "I'm old and muddle-headed. There's no harm in a dagger." Su Fengnian took out the spring thunder dagger from his case. Su Huainan placed it on his knees and stared at it for a long time. This old man has no joy to speak of in life. He has no fear of death. The reason why he is patient and not dying is because he wants to give that grandson of his a future, and also because he has one less reason to die in peace. Since this old man owes Su Shao, he can no longer owe you. Moreover, this old man has also thought of a method that will not let anyone down. Su Huainan took out the spring thunder dagger and handed it to Su Fengnian. The smile on his weathered face was incomparably open-minded. Come. Cut off Su Huainan's head, put it in a bag, and return to Baoyang to be the king of Baoyang. Chapter 624. 3 chapters of 12,000 words have been uploaded. It could not be said that they had come in high spirits, but it was also hard to say that they had returned in disappointment. Su Fengnian was still dressed as a traveler with a backpack on his back. The red-robed otherworldly item was still moving stealthily, but it now had an additional head that had died with a smile on its face. After traveling for 300 li, they saw 2 horses galloping toward the hut by the Ruoshui River. One of the men riding on the horse was handsome. He had the body of a northerner and the face of a southerner. When he saw Su Fengnian, his face immediately turned pale. He got off the horse and staggered towards Su Fengnian. He knelt on the ground and covered his heart with his hands. He clenched his teeth and choked with sobs. Su Fengnian was well aware of this, but he did not try to comfort him. With a cold face, he looked down at the son of a concubine whom Su Huainan had high hopes for. Such a cold and gloomy first meeting was really a killjoy. There was not the slightest bit of the atmosphere that was described in the history books where virtuous monarchs and famous ministers would regret not meeting each other earlier. The other horse was ridden by a young man who looked like a boy attendant. When he saw that his master was in such a daze, he also became extremely hostile towards Su Fengnian. The man had already turned 20 years old, but he was not yet 30. After losing his self-control for a moment, he restrained his expression and waved away the boy attendant's arm that was trying to support him. He stood up and asked the boy attendant to give him a horse. The master and the servant rode on the same horse. The 3 of them tacitly went to the south together. Along the way, they passed through the passes of various cities. The gentleman could hold hands and chat with the officers along the way, but he rarely called them brothers. After passing through half of the southern end of the Aquarius state, they went around the imperial court and were about to enter the Golden Toad state. They stopped at an inn in a small town on the border to rest. The 2 sides who were watching coldly from the sidelines finally had an open and honest conversation. The inn's business was poor. The large courtyard was only occupied by the 3 of them. The night was as cold as water. The boy attendant named Wang Mingxi squatted on the stone steps at the entrance of the courtyard and sighed at the stars in the sky. In the courtyard, there was a wooden table with a missing corner and a few broken bamboo chairs that would creak when one sat down. Su Beiji did not drink alcohol, but when he checked in, he specially bought a pot of wine from the inn. At this moment, he placed the pot in front of Su Fengnian who was sitting opposite him. Watching him pour the wine into the porcelain cup, Su Beiji said calmly, "It is said that drinking muddy wine brings happiness. It seems that you and I are not fated to meet." Su Fengnian said calmly, "This name was given by your grandfather himself?" Su Beiji twitched the corner of his mouth. "It wasn't called this at first. When I was 6 years old, I was studying in the Su family's private school. Grandfather happened to pass by the window and called me in front of him. After a question and answer, he changed it to Beiji. Oranges are orange in the south and oranges in the north. In the past, I didn't know the meaning behind grandfather's name. Only now do I know that he wanted me to move south and change from oranges to oranges. Grandfather put in a lot of effort, and as his grandson, I can't let him down." I changed my name for 3 years. After I was 9 years old, I followed grandfather to study and copy history books. My relationship with my parents was indifferent. Perhaps His Royal Highness doesn't know, but grandfather has been paying attention to you for many years. Especially from the time the King of Baelyong refused to let you enter the capital to the 2 times you traveled. Grandfather spent a lot of manpower and resources to intercept first-hand information. I dare say that he was the first person in Baymang to guess your identity. At this point, Su Beiji's gaze turned towards the room where Su Fengnian was. The 5 fingers of the hand resting on his knee trembled. The hand on the table didn't seem to have any abnormalities. Su Beiji retracted his gaze after a moment. His tone was calm. Grandfather has had a knot in his heart all these years. The one who tied the bell must untie it. Naturally, the knot must be untied by the person who tied it. Compared to the King of Baelyong, heir apparent personally going to Baymang is even more inconceivable. To tell you the truth, I once suggested that grandfather kill you before you even get close to Ruoshui. Since it's a dead knot, let's end it with one side dying. Su Fengnian smiled and downed the wine in his cup in one gulp. Su Beiji finally revealed a desolate expression. He lowered his head to look at the empty table in front of him. I just didn't expect that the dead knot would be replaced by his death. Grandfather said that even if he met you, there was a 50-50 chance of who would live and who would die. Su Fengnian lowered his head to drink his second cup of wine. He furrowed his brows without leaving a trace. Su Beiji pursed his lips and stared at Su Fengnian, who was slowly drinking his wine. He went straight to the point, almost interrogating him. Since you don't want to be the emperor, why did you come to Baymang? Why did you come to see my grandfather who didn't care about worldly affairs for many years? Which vassal king's legitimate eldest son is as crazy as you? So what if you handed over Baelyong's military power to Chen Jibao? Su Fengnian glanced at him. He picked up an empty cup, poured a cup of wine, and slowly pushed it to the table. Su Beiji shook his head and didn't raise his cup. His expression paused, and there was a faint sob in his voice. He muttered to himself, "Yes, I don't drink, so I don't know the taste of wine." Su Fengnian then said, "This is my second trip back to Baelyong. Before I came to Baymang, Su Xiao told me frankly the night before I left. The first time I went out with an old servant, a fat man called Chu Lushan sneaked behind me and secretly contacted no less than 50 former subordinates of Baelyong. Whether Baelyong's 300,000 iron cavalry rebelled or not was up to Su Xiao. He was born in a chaotic world, but he did not become a dog in a chaotic world." Su Xiao laughed and said that a dog in a hurry knew how to jump over a wall. He was a terrible chess player. If he was really dragged by the emperor to play chess, if he lost on the chessboard at most, he would flip over the chessboard and see who would be more hostile. The second time I openly traveled Jianghu, I only saw the tip of the iceberg of Baelyong's hidden power. Afterwards, Su Xiao said that Chen Jibao couldn't afford this. When the 6 kingdoms of spring and autumn were conquered, Su Xiao was conferred the title of King of Baelyong. Chen Jibao could have gone to Nanjiang and established his own family. He could have led nearly 80,000 soldiers of Baelyong to the south and divided the land and territory, becoming the second king of Liang with a different surname. Since he rejected the current emperor of Zhao, he couldn't blame his stingy adoptive father for giving him a chance. In Baelyong, each family has its own rules, and the country has its own laws. Su Beiji was silent and deep in thought. After a long time, he murmured, "Qi is born from the broken." Su Fengnian changed the topic to a more leisurely one. He smiled and asked, "Can you tell me the identity of the young Taoist child? If I don't ask clearly, I'll feel uncomfortable." Su Beiji glanced at Su Fengnian, who was spinning the empty wine cup in his hand, and said frankly, "I don't know the secret behind it. I only know that 10 years ago, the young Taoist child came to the Su family. 10 years later, he still looks like a child." Su Fengnian clicked his tongue and said, "Doesn't that confirm that mysterious saying?" The two of them said the same word at the same time, immortality. After they blurted out this word, the two of them had different expressions. Su Fengnian hid his hostility, while Su Beiji was full of curiosity. Su Beiji had followed his grandfather to cultivate in the public service since he was a child. He was good at reading people's expressions. When he saw the clues revealed by Su Fengnian, he paid attention but didn't ask. He didn't expect Su Fengnian to tell him the truth. I have a grudge with an old bastard who hid in Mount Longhu and achieved immortality. If you really go to Baelyong and are willing to lower yourself to help him, you can just wait and watch. Su Beiji didn't continue the conversation. Su Fengnian stood up and said, "We're about to enter Golden Toad State. I'm afraid that with your grandfather's ability to infiltrate, it won't be as easy to travel there as it is in Aquarius State. Let's all rest early." Su Beiji wanted to say something but stopped. He didn't say anything until Su Fengnian turned around. When Su Fengnian walked a few steps away, he couldn't help but speak. His voice was hoarse. "Take my grandfather's head back to Baelyong. Only then can this trip be considered worthwhile." Su Fengnian, who had a scholarly face, stopped and turned to look at the scholar who was much more knowledgeable than him. Su Beiji clenched his fists and placed them on his lap. He didn't look at Su Fengnian. "I also know that my grandfather wants to help you increase your prestige in the army. After all, taking the head of the former king of the Northern Courtyard is more difficult than leading an army to destroy 100,000 Baymang soldiers. I just want to take a look." "Just one look?" Su Fengnian asked. "Su Beiji, don't you hate me?" The extremely elegant and calm man smiled sadly. "How dare I hate you? Do you want my grandfather to die with regrets?" Chapter 625. "Oh," Su Fengnian replied and turned around to leave. He said softly, "It's hard for you to see your grandfather. I buried him by the Ruoshui River." Su Beiji was stunned. In the dead of the night, the servant boy who had warmed up the steps with his buttocks was bored to death. When he heard the noise, he turned his head with a face full of disbelief. Not only did his master, who did not drink a drop of wine, not only raised his cup and drank all the wine in it, but he also seemed to be crying and smiling. He raised his head and picked up the remaining wine pot and poured it all down his throat. The middle-aged man whose hands were longer than his knees had once made the arrogant chess and sword music school's headmaster sweat profusely outside the gate of heaven of Tao Te sect. However, after such an ambitious and ruthless person left the Taoist temple for the Arctic tundra and crossed the Yellow River, there were no disturbances along the way. When he was near the upper reaches of the Yellow River, he didn't make any shocking moves like jumping across the river. He paid the boatman money and crossed the river on a raft. He was like a clay bodhisattva without any temper. It should be known that among all the martial artists in the world, Wang Xianji, he could stand shoulder to shoulder with. When she left the martial emperor city for the first time in almost 50 years, the Liang dynasty sent thousands of cavalrymen to keep an eye on her, fearing that this old guy who liked to call himself the second in the world would cause trouble. 2 dynasties and 2 Jianghu people believed that as long as this man and Wang Xianji joined hands, they could easily kill the remaining 8 of the 10 people in the world. It was enough to show how powerful this Baymang military god with the surname Tuoba was. If one thought that as long as one was a top martial artist, he would be the kind of fledgling in Jianghu who could shock the world with a fart, even if he met Tuoba face to face, he would probably be regarded as a layman in front of a real Buddha. Everyone in Baymang knew that Tuoba didn't believe in Buddhism, but he was close to Buddhism and far away from Taoism. Especially when he assisted the empress in the same dynasty as the state preceptor immortal Qilin, they didn't even meet once in the past 20 years. It was like the vassal of the Liang dynasty, the archenemy of the Liang dynasty, was not allowed to see the other vassal. It was a calm day. Tuoba, who had been extremely valiant when he was young, walked down from the raft. His feet had barely touched the ferry when the surface of the Yellow River shook violently. It was as if there was a dragon at the bottom of the river. Frightened, the boatman tied the raft tightly and jumped ashore. He did not dare to fight for this small amount of money. The people waiting at the ferry only saw a blink of an eye before they realized that the previously living middle-aged man had disappeared without a trace. In the open space, the stern bodhisattva Tuoba saw an old Taoist. His hair and beard were as white as snow, and his Taoist robe fluttered in the absence of wind. He was truly like an immortal, possessing a rare immortal aura. Tuoba said calmly, "Imperial tutor, do you know that those who block me will die?" The old Taoist waved his horsetail whisk and smiled. "I am the Imperial Preceptor. The Imperial Preceptor is not me. It doesn't matter if I die or not." Tuoba said with disgust, "Stop pretending." The next moment, it was as if thunder had exploded all over Tuoba's body. The originally short man had grown to 9 feet tall. His pair of ape-like long arms no longer appeared abrupt. A clay bodhisattva would be unable to protect himself when crossing the river. Tuoba crossed the river. Even the gods and Buddhas couldn't stop him. It was rumored that there was a floating mountain in the Daoud sect that was 6,000 feet above the ground. There were thousands of palaces on the mountain. Li Dongxin pulled up the river and flooded the Daoud sect. The water gushed out from the heavenly gate and washed the jade steps. The white-robed monk floated to the ground and walked into a narrow valley that was filled with green. When he reached the end, he was suddenly enlightened. The valley didn't have the majestic buildings that people imagined. There was only a Taoist temple built against the mountain. It was a circular plaza with a Taiji diagram carved on it. The yin and yang fishes were intertwined. The entire plaza seemed to have returned to its original state and was unusually simple. There were clouds and mist rising from the yin and yang fishes, reaching straight to the sky. The white-robed monk raised his head and looked. There were dozens of giant white storks that were different from the same species spiraling upwards. It was obvious that there were Taoists riding them. Their Taoist robes were long sleeves and made them look like immortals riding cranes. These Taoists from the Daoud sect were originally the wine-offering Taoists who stayed in the temple. Li Dongxin returned their greetings with the river and forced them to escape into the sky. In Li Dongxin's vision, other than the Taoists and the white storks, there was indeed a huge mountain floating in the sky. The Taoists rode on the white storks and floated up. A young Taoist floated down from the floating mountain that reached the clouds. This Taoist with a sword on his back landed at the intersection of the yin and yang fishes, guarding the pass alone. The Taoist looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. He was extremely masculine and had a feminine appearance. Li Dongxin took a glance and sneered, as expected of the Qilin spiritual master who has reached the sage realm. Your skills are really impressive. You even figured out the secret technique of the I Chi turning 3 pure ones. Why, do you want me to pluck out the 9 worms and cut off the 3 corpses? But what about the remaining 2 fake immortals? Aren't they going out to welcome the guests together? That was too petty of him. Now that the 3 sects have each produced a sage, let's not talk about my master. Even the Confucian sage Chao Chongqing is a distinguished person who dares to treat the palace as a toilet. You, the Beimang imperial advisor who hides your strength, is nothing compared to him. The seemingly young Taoist smiled warmly and said, Li Dongxin, who has no zen to speak of, also wants to be angry? I won't argue with you. I'll just stand here and wait. The dragon tree monk has cultivated the unmovable zen through the Diamond Sutra. Since you insist on being fearful, I will not move today and let you do as you please. Li Dongxin simply responded with an "Oh." He did not say anything else and stretched out his arms towards the direction of the hovering mountain. His white kasaya suddenly stuck to his tall and sturdy body. Then, his feet sank and the ground was above his knees. The white-robed monk pulled down the entire hovering mountain. It suddenly pressed down on the young Taoist's head. Li Dongxin entered the heavenly gate alone and left the heavenly gate alone. He swept past nearly 1,000 steps and squatted on the ground to carry his master who was covered in gold. The few disciples of the Daoud sect's imperial advisor did not dare to stop him. The old monk was already on the verge of death. The old monk smiled and asked, You won the fight? The white-robed monk nodded. Disciple, is there a saying at the foot of the mountain that deep love does not live long? I don't know if it was right or wrong for me to agree to marry you back then. This is not a principle that a monk should say. Principles are not separated from the secular world. If it is reasonable, then it is reasonable. The Dharma is not necessarily the sentences in the Buddhist scriptures, and the sentences in the Buddhist scriptures are not necessarily the Dharma. East and west, north and south. Especially your daughter, she is very reasonable. If I could understand, I would willingly give her candied fruits. If I did not understand then, I would not give it to her in a hurry. Sometimes, I slowly thought it through and remembered to give her some food. My daughter even threw a tantrum and did not want it. Master, can you stop talking? You should go back to the temple and tell my daughter about these things. It's too late. Li Dongxin's figure once again flashed across the yellow river's surface like a white rainbow. It is difficult to understand the Dharma. There are many eminent monks in our 2 Zen temples who know more than your master. Many of them can even deal with the imperial court and the authorities. They are all carefree people. Master is really squatting in the latrine pit and not taking a shit. Sigh, I have been worried all these years. Fortunately, monks have shaved off 3,000 strands of worry. They are of the same generation as you, but they are less human than you. Since they have not become Buddhas, they are still human. You can't say that. It will hurt our friendship.
Master, I am praising you.
I know. I am just afraid that you will say it in front of others. You and I will not be able to get away with it.
Master, it is rare for you to be so muddle-headed.
Both North and South learned from you. Actually, to be honest, I am not afraid of annihilating Buddhism. I am not afraid of how many temples and scriptures are burned, or how many monks are chased away. What I am afraid of is that the Buddha's heart and Dharma will not last forever. Every Zen is still at Hinayana. Whether or not Hinayana can enter Mahayana in the future, I will not be able to see it.
Master, I do not wish to see that day. As the Master of North and South's Master, I do not wish to see that day either.
However, I can only say this to you. After saying this, the monk of the dragon tree, who was covered in dried gold, chanted Amitabha once before becoming silent. The white-robed monk, Li Dongxin, stopped. He tore off a section of his kasaya and tied it around his master. He closed his eyes and put his palms together before heading up to the 9 heavens. On this day, hundreds of Taoists and close to 10,000 devotees of the Tao virtue sect looked up at the boundless Buddha's light. They all heard the chanting of the Diamond Sutra descending from the sky. On this day, thousands of devotees became devout Buddhists. Chapter 626. A rare guest visited the small village of Jingtu Mountain. As the owner, a man in white stood at the entrance of the village.
When he saw the hunchbacked old man coming down from the carriage, he showed a rare smile of understanding. He quickly walked forward and respectfully called out, "Foster father."
The old man nodded and looked around. He clicked his tongue and said, "I just found out that there is such a beautiful place on the border of Bailiang." If the old man's eldest son was here, he would definitely refute him by saying, "What beautiful scenery? There isn't even half a stream. What kind of pretense is that?" In the eyes of outsiders, such a pair of tepid adopted father and son really couldn't be associated with the title of the Prince of Northern Liang and the Little Butcher. Those old people in the streets and alleys always mistakenly thought that once these two kings of hell met, they would always eat human flesh and drink human blood, shouting that they would kill tens of thousands of people the next day and so on. However, at this time, Su Xiao only asked about whether the supply of meat and vegetables in the manor was troublesome or not, and how to avoid the heat in the hot summer. Chen Zhibao also smiled and answered one by one. This was the first time Su Xiao set foot in the small village. The servants in the village were used to living a short, stable, and comfortable life under the protection of Chen Zhibao. Few people recognized Su Xiao's identity. Fortunately, Su Xiao was not the kind of person who liked to play with his identity. He did not care about the poor eyesight of the servants in the village. If it were a snobbish person like Li Gongda, the head of the new Bailiang Taoism, he would definitely want to cut out the eyes of the servants and feed them to the dogs. However, Chen Zhibao was indifferent and did not even deliberately say a word. From the moment he entered the village and sat down in the shade of a willow tree, he did not reveal Su Xiao's identity. Outside the village, there were no tall trees or high walls. Under the willow trees, the father and son could see the endless yellow sand. A well-behaved maidservant brought in a basin of iced lychee. The ice cubes were all hammered down from the ice house. Lychee was a rare fruit that was said to only grow in the miasma of southern Xinjiang. Every once in a while, it would be sent to the village. However, Chen Zhibao rarely tasted it, so he distributed it to the servants. Imperceptibly, the young girls in the village had raised their small mouths to be extremely crafty. Their vision and speech were also arrogant. Occasionally, they would go out to the village to play, take a stroll in the spring, or enjoy the lanterns. Not to mention the daughters of small families in the nearby provinces and counties, even the daughters of noble families would feel ashamed of their inferiority when they bumped into these maidservants, who were supposed to have a lowly status. It was not as if the old steward of the village had never mentioned to the general that he had to worry about the trifles of the village. However, his good-natured master dismissed it with a laugh every time, so the matter was left unsettled. When the old steward privately chatted with the young men and girls in the village, he would never forget to remind them that their general was extremely strict in his management of the army. They had good fortune. If they had gone to the Bailiang army, they would have been skinned alive a long time ago. They had never seen the general angry, especially the young girls, who would always laugh and say that they were willing to be beaten to death by the general. The old steward, who had retired from the Bailiang army, felt helpless, but at the same time, he was gratified and happy. After lecturing them with a stern face, he turned around and smiled brightly, thinking that it was the great fortune of the servants. Su Xiao picked up a lychee, peeled it, and put it in his mouth.
He asked the delicate servant girl who was unwilling to leave immediately, "Young girl, how old are you?" The servant girl had been peeking at the general with all her might, but she was startled by the old man's question.
The village rarely had guests, and she could not guess the identity of this old man. She could not guess whether he was a current general in the Bailiang army or a provincial official. She only felt that he looked amiable and amiable.
Besides, no matter how high the official's hat was, he would not dare to behave atrociously in the village under the general's name.
She did not have any stage fright, and quickly smiled and said, "In response to Uncle's question after the new year, I will be 16. Su Xiao swallowed the lychee and did not spit out the seed. He laughed loudly and said, "Then do you have a sweetheart? If you do, have your General Chen be the matchmaker." The beautiful girl with an oval face was shy. She deliberately put on some light rouge and face powder and said shyly, "No." Chen Zhibao was obviously in a very good mood. For the first time he joked, "Lucy, if you have a sweetheart, I will be the matchmaker for you." The young servant girl, whose heart was in the general's hands, did not know how to hide her emotions.
She thought that the general was going to drive her out of the village, and her eyes suddenly became wet.
She did not dare to show it in front of the guests, so she just looked like she was about to cry. Su Xiao felt that his young girl was lively, and laughed loudly. Chen Zhibao shook his head and smiled. The servant girl named Lu Ci did not know how to react to the two's laughter, but she was not embarrassed. Her eyebrows relaxed, and a smile reappeared. After Su Xiao laughed, he seemed to want to test her.
He picked up a plump lychee and asked, "Lu Ci, do you know what this is?"
The 16-year-old girl, Lu Xiangyi, who was standing under the willow tree, smiled and replied, "Lychees." Su Xiao nodded. "I heard that a lychee without a branch changes color one day, loses its fragrance 2 days, and loses its flavor 3 days later. After 4 or 5 days, it will lose its color, fragrance, and smell. After half a year, it will be even more disgusting. It is not even comparable to the watermelons that cost a few coins a caddy in Bailiang. Lizzie, this is a good name. It is ironed well. Only a scholar can think of such a good name."
The servant girl, who was afraid that the guests would look down on the village, quickly retorted, "Uncle, our lychees are very fresh."
Chen Zhibao did not say a word.
He waved his hand, and the servant girl did not dare to act rashly.
She obediently retreated, but there was still some childish indignation on her face. Chen Zhibao waited for her to leave before he slowly said, "Back in the day, foster father single-handedly built the Southern Courier Road. Apart from the transportation of red sandalwood, yellow flower, and other tributes, such as lychees and exotic delicacies, it is still considered smooth and unimpeded. The rest is not worth mentioning."
If it were not for Zhang Julu personally supervising the Fire of Peace, the Fire of Beacon would have been almost completely abandoned.
Su Xiao glanced at the fresh lychees in the ice tray and smiled. Being prepared for danger in times of peace is as difficult as being content with what you have. Chen Zhibao suddenly said, "Foster father, this year on New Year's Eve, do you want to come to this little village with His Royal Highness for a New Year's Eve dinner? I will personally cook a few dishes that I specialize in." Su Xiao mischievously said, "In the end, you just want Wei Xiong to eat your dishes, right?" Chen Zhibao smiled helplessly. The sunset in Bailiang was 3 hours later than in the south, but no matter how late it would still set. Father and son gazed at the sunset in the west. Su Xiao was touched by the scene and said softly, "It has been hard on you these past few years." Chen Zhibao was about to speak when Su Xiao smiled and asked, "How was it that you fought 2 rounds in a row with the founder of the chess and sword music school and the martial prodigy Hong Jingyan?" Chen Zhibao smiled and said, "Although the outside world says it is amazing, in reality, I did not fight to the death with them, so I did not have the opportunity to use that stick of plum wine." The famous general in white frowned and said, "That Hong Jingyan is a character. That battle with me was just a method for him to build up his reputation. In the future, when he enters the army from the Jianghu, he is destined to be a great enemy of Bailiang." Su Xiao rubbed his hands and said with emotion, "Beimang is full of talents." It was inevitable that one would have supporters in the army when leading an army to war. However, Chen Zhibao had never heard of any cliques in Bailiang's political circle. Whether it was Li Gongda, an old glutton in the officialdom who took advantage of every opportunity, or Yan Jieshi, the governor of Baelyong who had a high reputation but later betrayed Baelyong, or even many scholars and refined scholars, Chen Jibao ignored them all. When he left the army and came to the quiet and secluded village, he closed the door and refused to see anyone, let alone take the initiative to make friends with anyone. It could be said that not a single flaw could be found in Chen Jibao, the adopted son of a butcher.
In private, he was even more indifferent and had no desires.
Such a person with a perfect personality was worthy of heartfelt admiration, but also made some people feel even more fearful. Chen Jibao looked at the sky and whispered, "Foster father, the weather is cold." Su Xiao nodded and stood up.
He shook his head and said, "I'm really old."
Chen Jibao had welcomed Su Xiao at the entrance of the village and even walked him out of the village. When Su Xiao sat in the carriage, the man in white still stood there and did not leave for a long time. After General Gu Jiantang took charge of the border, the entire army at the border suddenly became solemn.
However, there were wild rumors in the border army that the general, who was known for his meticulous management of the army, had taken in a sloppy person as his adopted son.
In the Liang dynasty, Gu Jiantang, who had destroyed 2 countries, had a military merit that was second only to the infamous king of Baelyong. Furthermore, General Gu's reputation did not lose out to any famous scholar. He treated his soldiers like his own children and treated them with respect. He used the army like a god. Inside and outside of the court, there were many good things to say about him. Even Gu Jiantang's many wives and concubines, who were as beautiful as fairies, became a fairy tale. His eldest son, Gu Donghai, and his second son, Gu Shishan, both joined the army at a young age, and did not bring disgrace to the great General Gu's reputation. Their military exploits were outstanding, and their achievements far surpassed those of their peers. What was not easy was that they drew a clear line with the capital's playboys. They did not interact with each other and never once drank wine together. Compared to the king of Baelyong, this general only had a disadvantage in terms of age. In the future, his advantage would also be age. How could he let a slut surnamed Yuan into his family? This puzzled many people. Yuan Tingshan, who was used to being a stray dog and a rat crossing the street, believed more than anyone else that he would have a meteoric rise. Therefore, even though he had become the half-adopted son of Gu Jiantang, the head of the world's machete men, he only felt that it was natural and had no awareness that he should be extremely lucky. He had almost lost his life in the Baogua temple in Gangnam-do.
Under the sword chi of the young martial granduncle, he fled to the northern region in one breath.
Although he still had some lingering fear when he thought about it, he often woke up from nightmares and was so scared that he was covered in cold sweat as if he had fallen into a water tank. He held the knife that was used as a pillow and was about to kill someone. However, this fear not only did not make this low-ranking foreign minister of Mount Hui discouraged, but he also became more and more desperate to practice martial arts. After receiving the secret manuals from the old immortals in Longhu Mountain, his realm skyrocketed. It was not an exaggeration to say that he had traveled 1,000 miles a day. Chapter 627. He recklessly went to challenge Gu Jiantang to a duel. After killing 80 people, he was captured by the hundreds of elite soldiers under the Grand General's command. However, it was a blessing in disguise. Gu Jiantang agreed to spar with him on the training field. The Grand General was barehanded, while Yuan Tingshan used his saber. In the end, the Grand General was holding the saber with only 2 fingers. Yuan Tingshan exerted all of his strength, but was still unable to pull the saber out from between his fingers. He was even kicked in the stomach by Gu Jiantang. He was treated like a dog that only knew how to bark and not bite and was thrown out of the camp. Unexpectedly, after 10 days, Yuan Tingshan, who had been on the verge of death, once again charged into the camp. This time, Gu Jiantang did not personally make a move. He only let his second son, Gu Shishan, and Yuan Tingshan both fight barehanded. As a result, Gu Shishan was almost strangled to death by Yuan Tingshan, who did not know how to control his strength. Gu Donghai took off his saber and picked up 2 ordinary standard sabers from the weapon rack before walking into the training field. He kept one for himself and threw the other to Yuan Tingshan. The 2 of them fought fiercely for more than 100 rounds. One of Yuan Tingshan's arms was almost chopped off. He grinned and said that he admitted defeat.
After the battle, he did not forget to shake his arm and take away the military saber that was very good for him.
A month later, Yuan Tingshan began to charge into the camp for the 3rd time. This time, he received the nickname of Mangy Dog. This time, Yuan Tingshan slashed Gu Donghai's body more than 10 times. Fortunately, he did not kill him this time. He only caused the Grand General's eldest son to be seriously injured but not fatal.
Yuan Tingshan, who was possessed by the devil, pointed the tip of his saber at the Grand General sitting on the high platform and shouted, "Old man Gu, if you have the ability, chop me to death today.
Otherwise, sooner or later, I will replace you."
From then on, the mangy dog that was not chopped to death by the Grand General became a well-known mad dog at the border. Later on, this vicious and unkillable young mad dog caught the eye of the Grand General's youngest daughter for no reason. It was obvious that Yuan Tingshan was not only an adopted son, but also half a son-in-law of the Gu family. Currently, Yuan Tingshan didn't have any real military power. He was only a secondary-class 6th-rank official. In the past year, he had relied on the banner of the great general to recruit over 100 stragglers from the Jianghu. For the past half a year, he had been provoking the sects at the border. He had a domineering attitude of, "Those who submit to me will prosper, and those who resist me will perish."
Great General Gu didn't pay any attention to this. Almost all the 2nd and 3rd-class sects at the border had been harassed by Yuan Tingshan. Among them, several unyielding and rigid sects were directly slaughtered by Yuan Tingshan. Occasionally, he would leave behind some women and children. Mad dog Yuan Tingshan killed people without batting an eyelid. He didn't do anything despicable like kidnapping women and occupying women. This time, Yuan Tingshan once again wiped out a small sect of 100 that didn't know when to advance or retreat. Just like before, he didn't leave even a chicken or a dog alive. During this time, there was a valiant henchman who couldn't hold back his thirst. When he saw a beautiful woman, he took off his pants and pressed her on the table. Just as he wanted to have sex with her, he was seen by Yuan Tingshan. With a single slash, he ended the lives of both the unlucky man and the innocent woman. There was a woman who secretly followed Yuan Tingshan through the Jianghu in high spirits.
When they rode back to the military town, she turned around to look at the playful man lying on the back of the horse. She asked softly, "You should have just killed that pervert.
Why did you kill that woman as well?" Yuan Tingshan said coldly, "The woman's chastity is gone. Living is just a torture."
The woman said softly, "Maybe she's actually willing to live?"
Yuan Tingshan said unhappily, "That's none of my business." The woman still wanted to say something, but Yuan Tingshan said impatiently, "Don't nag me. You haven't even married into my family, and you already think you're my wife." The woman who was born in the dynasty was being reprimanded by a man who was just a brute not long ago. She actually didn't get angry and only stuck out her tongue. Yuan Tingshan was unsettled. He sat up straight and said with a smile, "Oh right, where did you talk about the soldier training records written by your father?" Gu Beihu, who was the youngest daughter of General Gu Zhentang, became interested and said, "We're about to talk about the 19 matters of marching."
Yuan Tingshan rolled his eyes and said, "Marching?
I know that too. Isn't the essence of it all about speed? Look at my subordinates. They ride fast, attack fast, kill fast, and steal even faster. Of course, when they see that the situation is not right, they're the fastest to escape." Gu Beihu, who was famous in the capital for being unruly and difficult to please, was abnormally docile and obedient in front of Yuan Tingshan. She covered her mouth and laughed, then said seriously, "Marching isn't that simple.
Not only is my father familiar with the books of the military, he also studied the vagrant bandits of the spring and autumn period who were good at marching.
My father told me that although these bandits weren't part of the general trend, their specialty was in the word, flow. They were good at marching, and each camp had thousands or tens of thousands of troops.
They also had the old and the weak in the middle and the elite in the outside.
When they moved, they had scouts scouting from afar. When they stopped, they had horses and supplies. Furthermore, my father greatly admired Lu Shengxiang's 1,000 cavalry entering Luzhou on a snowy night, as well as Chu Lushan's lone army entering Shu. He often compared these victories to maps and records. Let's not talk about other things. Just the maps and records alone. Generally, in the military, maps and records are handled by a subordinate of the Ministry of War. Before a battle, they would go to the bureau to ask for them. However, in the military, before every border, there would always be a detailed map on his desk. During the Spring and Autumn War, my father personally destroyed 2 countries. When he entered the imperial palace, the first thing he took was not those beautiful concubines or gold treasures, but the map of the country.
From this, he could tell how many cities there were in a country and how much taxes there were. She imitated the tone of a general and smiled like an old man.
All the details of a country are in my hands. Gu Beihu spoke with great interest, but Yuan Tingshan listened until he was drowsy.
She had originally wanted to talk about the 19 matters of marching in detail, but seeing that the man who was full of admiration had no desire to listen, she could only resentfully give up.
Yuan Tingshan suddenly said, "Hey, it's a flat land." Gu Beihu glared at Yuan Tingshan, who spoke without thinking, and then quickly lowered her head to look at her flat chest. She felt wronged. She did not expect Yuan Tingshan to say something like the sun rising from the west. "I've thought about it. Your chest is a bit small, but you're still a good wife. As long as you're not jealous, marrying you as a mistress in the future is actually not bad." Gu Beihu's spirits were instantly high. Unfortunately, Yuan Tingshan poured a bucket of cold water on her head. "I'll say the ugly words first. In the future, I'll definitely take a beauty as a concubine. If a man doesn't lack money, it's not right to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. It's really not right. I've lived in vain."
Gu Beihu whispered.
"Don't even think about it. If you dare take a slut home, I'll beat one to death. If 2 come, I'll poison a pair.
If 3 come, I'll go back to my parents' home and tell my father."
Yuan Tingshan held his belly and laughed. Gu Beihu saw that he was happy, so she was also happy. Her mother seemed to have said that this was a woman's love. Yuan Tingshan lowered his head and reached out to touch the plain scabbard of the standard saber. He raised his head and said, "My parents died in the turmoil of war, and I don't even know where they are buried. I only have one master in my entire life. Although his martial arts were sloppy, he treated me well. A master for a day is a father for life. At least I know where the old man's grave is. If you want to marry me, you can go to the grave with me and kowtow a few times. That old man was addicted to wine, so when you go there, bring some good wine." Gu Beihu, do you think that the dignified daughter of a great general is degrading herself by doing this kind of thing?
The woman bit her lips and shook her head.
Yuan Tingshan grinned.
He squeezed the horse's belly and approached her.
His calloused hand rubbed her black hair. Governor Li Gongda, who was originally the second in command of a province, had become the second in command of the entire northern Liang Path in name. As an official, he had already reached a high level of not showing his emotions on his face. However, after he sent a letter home to a second-rank official, he was already grinning from ear to ear.
He caught all the servants in the mansion and rewarded them with silver. The steward who carried the silver behind him had thin arms and legs to begin with, so his arms were almost broken from exhaustion.
Master Li's ability to scrape the land was second to none in the Liang dynasty. Giving out money? It was rare. The administrator wandered slowly in the garden of the mansion. The stout old man, who usually complained that he was tired after walking a few more steps, had probably walked dozens of miles today, but he was still in high spirits. Without turning his head, he smiled at the steward and said, "Lin Wang, this time I've gained face. My precious son is so promising. Not to mention that he became a crossbowman, 1 in 10,000. This time he went to northern Mang and killed countless northern barbarians. This kind of military merit can't be found even in the whole of northern Liang, let alone in Feng province. What do you think of my son Hanlin? Is he a dragon among men?" The old steward named Lin Wang didn't dare to say no.
He thought that his master had said this dozens of times, but he still had to flatter him with a righteous tone.
Yes. Master, you're right. If the young master is not a dragon among men, no one in Bailiang can be worthy of this title. However, the old steward, who was used to seeing the young master cause trouble in Feng province, was really shocked. The master's ancestral grave was really smoking. The young master, who was not good at literature but good at martial arts, had become outstanding in less than 2 years after entering the Bailiang army. Li Gongda frowned and said, "You're not being particular. Of course, besides the 2 princes, it's my son's turn." Lin Wang quickly smiled and said, Yes. Chapter 628. In Bailiang, it was said that the administrator had 3 meetings and 3 meetings. The third meeting was that he would steer according to the wind, be greedy for money, and be aroused by women. The third meeting was that he would not act until he saw the hair, would not shed tears until he saw the coffin, and would not kneel until he saw Prince Liang. The knowledge in this matter was not great, but it was not small either. In any case, The benevolent had their own views, and the wise had their own views. There were many snobbish people in the northern Liang officialdom who considered themselves to be the disciples and grand disciples of Lord Li, the official. When the servant girls heard that the ruthless young master was about to return home with illustrious military achievements, they were not only skeptical, but also fearful of the impending disaster. Since Li Gongda refused to kneel before Prince Liang, and even dared to disregard imperial edicts several times, throwing them away as soon as he received them, it was easy to imagine how perverse this powerful border official was. Like father like son. Before Li Hanlin joined the army, as Li Gongda's son and the crown prince's friend, he was worthy of his reputation as a dandy. If it weren't for the 2 golden tokens that allowed him to avoid death, he would have been dragged out and hacked to pieces a long time ago. Master, 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 master. Master has ridden into the city. A gatekeeper hurriedly ran into the garden, shouting. Coincidentally, he fell flat on his face, which made his loyalty even more commendable. The chief steward behind the administrator saw this and curled his lips in disdain. Li Gongda's old face was full of smiles.
He coughed a few times and ordered the chief steward, Lin Wang, go and inform the mistress.
4 riders entered the city, and after entering the city, they reined in their horses and moved slowly. They were led by Li Hanlin, followed by Lu Dou, Li Shiyue, and an ordinary crossbowman named Feng Hutu. He had the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear. He looked fierce, but his temperament was the most gentle of the 4. Before the 4 riders entered the city, they first went to Ma Zhenjai, who had died in the battle at the Ladder Mountain. They personally delivered the compensation to his family. Ma Zhenjai was not the only one. Almost 80 to 90% of the 50 men who had died in Beimang had died. The 4 of them went to visit the homes of the chiefs and brothers who had died in the battle. There was still half a day of vacation left. They had agreed to stay at Li Hanlin's place for a few days, but Li October said that the main event was still to go to his place to eat and drink. He would not stop until he had gained a few pounds of autumn fat. His father was once a crossbowman of Bailiang and had just been promoted to sergeant. He had always thought that Li Hanlin was just a disciple from an ordinary family. When October Li saw the intimidating administrator's mansion, and saw the old man, who was solemnly dressed in the second-rank civil official's make-up uniform, holding the new chief's hand and weeping on the street in spite of his official prestige, October Li was somewhat stunned. A woman wearing the title of a lady was crying as she hugged Li Hanlin. Her heart ached terribly.
Feng Hutu was slow to realize that a servant had already taken his horse away after he dismounted. He then nudged Li October with his elbow and asked carefully, October, the chief's father is also an official. Why, is he older than your father?
Li October laughed and scolded softly. You fool, this is the chief administrator of Bailiang, second rank. Do you think he's older or not? My father is far from it. Mother ***, the chief is not honest. At first, I was wondering why the chief had the same name as Li Hanlin, the villain of Fengzhou. It turns out that they are the same person. Mother ***, fortunately, I originally planned to introduce my sister to Lu Dou. If it were our chief, my sister would be scared half to death. In addition to the trusted aides of the administrator, there was also an extremely beautiful woman standing next to Li Gongda. She looked somewhat similar to Li Hanlin, but perhaps because her eyes were naturally cold, they made her, who had a pair of charming eyes, seem a little unapproachable. When she saw her younger brother, who had always made her worry since he was a child, no matter how cold her temperament was, she quietly cried and pinched Li Hanlin hard with her eyes red. Bailiang women were mostly heroic, but there were also a few who were outstandingly beautiful. Yan Donggu was known for his talent in Bailiang, and Li Hanlin's sister, Li Fuzhen, purely used her beauty to move people's hearts. Su Fengnian, as the heir and close friends with Li Hanlin and Yan Qiji, could be said to be in a favorable position. Unfortunately, he had always been at odds with Yan Donggu. As for Li Fuzhen, who had nothing special other than her beauty, it was strange to say that she actually looked down on Su Fengnian from the bottom of her heart more than Yan Donggu. The former would even say a few harsh words to the heir when he was angry, but Li Fuzhen refused to even look at him. 2 years ago, she had been possessed and fell in love at first sight with a poor scholar. At that time, Li Hanlin was secretly resentful of the heir's lack of loyalty and went out to travel without telling her. Chapter 629. Li Hanlin originally wanted to secretly kill that bastard who dared to steal his sister from the heir, but he could not do anything about his sister being stubborn and refusing to eat. She said that if he died, she would die. She wanted to be a pair of lovebirds. After much persuasion, he finally persuaded her. Li Hanlin did not dare to kill that fellow, and secretly made things difficult for him. God knew that the more the scholar was defeated, the braver he became. Even Li Gongda, who was still the provincial governor of Feng province at the time, had a whole new level of respect for him. He privately weighed the pros and cons with his wife and thought that it would be better to let him go than to block him. It was better to treat him like raising a dog to guard the door outside. After a few operations, he first raised the scholar's family rank, and then had him become a minor official. When Li Gongda became the administrator, his chickens and dogs rose to the heavens. The scholar also went from being a minor official to an official. Officials and officials. The difference of one word was like the difference between heaven and earth. Li Gongda, who was still the provincial governor of Feng province at the time, had a whole new level of respect for him. He privately weighed the pros and cons with his wife and thought that it would be better to let him go than to block him. He thought of it as raising a dog to guard the door outside. After a few operations, he first raised the scholar's family rank, and then had him become a minor official. When Li Gongda became the administrator, his chickens and dogs rose to the heavens. The scholar also went from being a minor official to an official. Officials and officials. The difference of one word was like heaven and earth. Later on, when Su Fengnian returned from his travels, he left Liangzhou on his white horse. Since then, he no longer had any contact with this woman, who did not like men's appearance and only liked talent and learning. She was happy that she did not see. Her heart did not feel troubled. She wished that the heir would never return to the Li mansion for the rest of his life. The crossbowman who had gone through fire and water with him strode into the mansion. Li October and the other two did not flinch. Li Gongda, who had long cultivated a pair of discerning eyes, was very good at reading people. Seeing them, not only was he not angry, he was very gratified. In the end, the military could train people. These brothers that his son had made friends with would be the backbone of Bailiang in the future. Li Hanlin greeted the elders of the mansion. After bathing and changing his clothes, he ate fiercely with Lu Do and the other two. When his wife saw that her son, who liked to pick fat and thin, did not leave a single grain of rice behind and finished 3 big bowls of white rice, she felt a wave of sadness. She sat next to her son and looked at him carefully. No matter how much she looked, she could not get enough of him. She muttered to herself, "You've become tanned and have lost a lot of weight. You have to stay for a few more days. If the army urges you, your father won't dare to plead with the king of Bailiang. Mother will go." Except for the mute Lu Do, Li Hanlin put many dishes into Li October and Feng Hutu's chopsticks. He made a funny face and joked, "Mother, military law is like a mountain. Don't blindly join in the fun. A loving mother makes a useless son. Do you know that?" His wife glared at him and said, "How can a loving mother give birth to a useless son? Who dares to call my son a useless son? Mother will slap him in the face." The administrator stroked his beard and laughed. "That's reasonable, that's reasonable." After the sumptuous banquet, Li Gongda and his wife were tactful. Although they had 1,000 things to say in their hearts, they still restrained themselves from disturbing the young people. In a pavilion with a raised eave, Feng Hutu was led to turn here and there under the guidance of others. When he came back, he clicked his tongue in wonder and said, "Chief Biao, even the outhouse in your house is spacious and luxurious. You have to find me a big bed to sleep on so that I can tell the villagers when I go home." "Look at you." Li October picked up a grape and threw it at him. Feng Hutu smiled and held it in his mouth. Li October threw it again, but it was like walking a dog. Feng Hutu didn't care and played with it happily. Lu Do cursed with a calm voice. "You two idiots." Li Fujian sat quietly and virtuously to the side, watching with her mouth agape. Of course, she didn't know that in Bei Meng, Feng Hutu had blocked a sharp knife that was comparable to Bailiang's knife. In a moment of desperation, Li October had used her hand to deflect several arrows for Feng Hutu. One of the arrows had pierced his palm. Li Fujian did not know what kind of price the crossbowmen had paid as the vanguard scouts traveled north and uprooted the beacons one after another. Li Hanlin suddenly turned to look at Li Fujian and asked, "Sister, do you still like that poor scholar?" Li Fujian's expression was somewhat unnatural. Li Hanlin didn't want to embarrass his sister and smiled sincerely. "Sister, as long as you don't regret it." Li Fujian, who felt very unfamiliar, didn't know how to respond. Li Hanlin looked out of the pavilion. "I didn't have the right to say anything before, but now it's a bit better. That scholar is very scheming. 2 years ago, I thought so, and now it's even more so. After all, I'm a bad person myself, and I'm always very good at judging bad people. But since you insist on liking him, I can't do anything more. But if you miss out on Brother Feng, sister, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Li Fujian slowly lowered her head. 2 slender fingers twirled the corner of her skirt and asked, "Because he might become king of Bailiang?" Li Hanlin suddenly laughed and said, "Pretend I didn't say anything." Li Fujian looked at her brother who was going to arm wrestle with Feng Hutu and felt very lost. She said goodbye and left the pavilion. Li Gongda came to a place far away from the pavilion and stood very far away. Lu Do kicked Li Hanlin, who was busy competing with Feng Hutu. Li Hanlin jogged to his father and said with a laugh, "Father, what's the matter?" Could it be that his mother is controlling him too tightly, and he wants money from me, her son, to drink wine with his colleagues? How much do you want? Don't even think about a few thousand taels. I don't even have 100 taels left in my pocket. Father, how are you going to spend it? Li Gongda cursed the brat and slowly walked away. Li Hanlin hesitated for a moment and waved his hand at Lu Do and the other 2. He ran to catch up and put his arm around his father's shoulder. He walked with this old man who had been scolded countless times in Bailiang, but was still the most indomitable and heroic man in Li Hanlin's heart. However, he made a gesture of raising his head and raising his cup to drink wine. He smiled, unable to change his nature, and said with a smile, "Father, I've earned some money. It's not much, but I have to show my filial piety to you. How about the 2 of us go drink a few catties of green ants?" On this day, in an elegant little restaurant not far from the Li family's mansion in the city, the administrator and his son, who was a crossbowman and the chief of the crossbowmen, spent only a few dozen taels of silver, including wine and meat. In those years, this son often stole thousands of taels of silver from places that the old man deliberately hid. He spent a lot of money in Liangzhou or Lingzhou, but Li Gongda didn't feel any heartache. Even earlier, in order to get a bigger official's hat, he used chests and chests of gold and silver. Li Gongda didn't feel any heartache. On this day, he only spent a few dozen taels of silver, but the old man's heart was already pained.